Chapter 690. The atmosphere in the carriage was very quiet. It had been a long time since Jean Hausa finished reading the information. There was no reaction. Tang Hua couldn't help but be a little worried. Boss? Jean Hausa withdrew his thoughts from the past. Looking at the information in his hand, his face was a little gloomy. His gaze fell on Zhang Yi's photo and he sneered. If Zhang Yi comes back, won't Zhang Li and Zhang Yang be unable to sit still? His lips curled into a mocking smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Tang Hua nodded. Zhang Li and Zhang Yang were transferred abroad by the old master. They won't be able to come back for the time being. At this point, Tang Hua's expression suddenly changed. I received news that Zhang Yi seems to have contacted the people in the sky. I think he's just trying to get Tianji's order and use it as a stepping stone to his family. Jean Hausa's gaze became more and more sinister. His gaze was gloomy as if he had thought of something. Zhang Yi, don't think about the list in the sky. However, I can give him another big gift. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the street view of Qing City outside the window. No matter what, Zhang Li and Zhang Yang are part of the Zhang family. Since the old man wants Zhang Yi to go home, then they have to come back and send a congratulatory gift, right? Tang Hua understood and nodded. That's right. This gift can't be light. That's right. Since Zhang Li and Zhang Yang have sent a great gift, I, as their elder brother, naturally have to send a great gift as well. Boss. Tang Hua immediately reacted. Six's brother is waiting. It's fine. Tell old 6 and old 7 to prepare. When does Zhang Yi come home? That's when we make our move. Don't worry. Zhang Kun lay on the hospital bed and listened to Uncle Chi's reply. He didn't look too well. Ever since he was struck by the wind, his body had not been in good shape. Even if he went out, he had to use a wheelchair. He had to gasp for air just to say a single sentence. More importantly, he couldn't move half of his body. For Zhang Kun, who had once been all-powerful, this was truly more uncomfortable than death. Zhang Yi is back? He's here. Uncle Chi was the butler of the Zhang Manor. He was also one of Zhang Kun's most trusted subordinates. He had followed Zhang Kun for many years. Let him come up. Zhang Yi came up. He looked somewhat similar to Zhang Kun. It could even be said that he was the most similar to Zhang Kun in the third generation. However, this resemblance was only in appearance. The thing you said last time, how is it? Because of the wind, Zhang Kun's voice was very slow. His voice was hoarse and it sounded unpleasant no matter how one listened to it. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I didn't manage to get Skyline's deal. At this point, Zhang Yi was still a little unwilling. He knew that this was an opportunity for him. However, the current situation had exceeded his expectations. Zhang Kun narrowed his eyes with some dissatisfaction. The Zhang family was a big business, so he didn't put it in his eyes. But he was the one who called Zhang Yi back. If Zhang Yi couldn't come up with some good results, how could he convince the public? Not to mention that he was powerless now. He was old and could no longer support the Zhang family. Originally, Zhang Lai was the heir of the Zhang family, and Zhang Kun had high hopes for him. However, Zhang Lai's two sons, Zhang Yang and Zhang Li, weren't very successful. One had mediocre aptitude, so it was difficult for him to take on such a big responsibility. The other had some ability, but he was arrogant, complacent, and self-righteous. In Zhang Kun's eyes, neither of these two grandsons were qualified successors. Other than Zhang Lai, he didn't know how many illegitimate children he had outside. But at present, there were only a few who could be registered in Qing City. One was Zhang Ji, Zhang Yi's father. The other was Zhang Quan. He gave birth to Zhang Cheng and Zhang Shi. Compared to Zhang Yang and Zhang Li, Zhang Cheng and Zhang Shi were even more mediocre. Zhang Kun didn't like these grandsons. However, there was no one he could use at this time. Not to mention that none of the grandsons in the third generation could catch his eye. Even Zhang Lai and Zhang Kun were very dissatisfied. And he couldn't even say these dissatisfactions. Those secrets of the Zhang family made him unable to give up on Zhang Lai, his son. Even if he was just putting on a show, he had no choice but to hand over some power to Zhang Lai. Not to mention that he was unwilling to hand over these power to Zhang Lai. Zhang Lai wasn't young anymore. He was already in his 50s. No matter how capable he was, his energy couldn't be compared to that of a young person. The Zhang family needed new blood. But among the 5 grandsons, none of them were to his liking. Previously, he had revealed some intentions to let Zhang Yi think that he could enter the Zhang family and obtain the Zhang family's power. But he didn't expect that this Zhang Yi was also a useless person. Stupid? He wanted to scold him for being an idiot, but now was the time to use Zhang Yi. Zhang Kun thought of this and became more and more angry. Jean Yi was a rare smart person in the third generation of the Jean family. How could he not know what Jean Kuan wanted to scold? Perhaps he had thought of something. Jean Yi suddenly raised his head. "Grandfather, don't you want to know who the person who intercepted the order from Tianji and made me return empty-handed was and waste these few months?" Jean Kuan looked at him, and a bad premonition flashed in his old and turbid eyes. What do you want to say?" "The person who obtained the order from Tianji is Jean Hausa." Jean Yi said word by word, even if he couldn't get anything good. He had to drag someone down with him. Jean Kuan's face suddenly turned red, and he started coughing violently. Uncle Chi was behind him, quickly supporting his body and patting him on the back. However, it was useless. Jean Kuan was still coughing violently. He glared at Jean Yi, almost wanting to stare a hole in his body. What did you say?" His voice was hoarse and his eyes were bloodshot. Jean Yi had never been close to this grandfather. Seeing Jean Kuan like this, he was a little scared. "I said, the person who obtained the order from Tianji is Jean Hausa." Jean Kuan coughed again. This time he coughed even more violently than before. The order from Tianji wasn't much. Although the profits it brought were considerable, it wasn't necessary for the Jean family. However, the person who obtained the order from Tianji shouldn't be Jean Hausa. Anyone could do it, but it couldn't be Jean Hausa, that be ****. "Grandfather," Jean Yi still wanted to say something more. Jean Kuan grabbed the water cup by the bedside and threw it at Jean Yi. Although he was old, the temper of his youth was still there. This throw almost hit Jean Yi's head. If he hadn't dodged quickly, his face would have been disfigured. "Grandfather, since you're fine, I'll go out first." After saying that, Jean Yi turned around and left. His footsteps seemed to be chased by a ghost. When Jean Kuan saw this, he coughed violently again. No matter how Uncle Chi comforted him, it was useless. It wasn't easy for him to calm down, but Jean Kuan's expression was still terrifyingly gloomy. He's indeed a ****. I should have killed him back then. I should have killed him. It was obvious that it took a lot of effort to speak, but he still said 2 sentences in a row. It could be seen how angry Jean Kuan was. After scolding, he looked at Uncle Chi. "Give the order. I don't want to see that **** live in this world. No matter who you find, no matter what method you use, I don't want to see him again." Uncle Chi had followed Jean Kuan for the longest time. When he heard his decision, he couldn't help but frown. "Master Kuan, Jean Hausa's ability is not bad. Wouldn't it be a pity to get rid of him just like that?" Others didn't know what Jean Hausa had done all these years, but Uncle Chi knew it very well. If such a capable person could really take over the Jean family would definitely be able to continue their glory. "Don't even think about it." Jean Kuan didn't consider this suggestion at all. "Even if my Jean family's things are thrown away, donated, and squandered, I definitely won't give them to that ****. Uncle Chi was speechless, but he could understand Jean Kuan's concerns. Jean Kuan didn't care if he understood or not. What he needed to do now was to get rid of Jean Hausa, who was an eyesore. "Do as I say." Jean Hausa didn't know that someone wanted his life. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. He had been very busy in Qing City for the past 2 days, very busy. On one hand, he had personally negotiated the cooperation with Tianji. With this business, the company would definitely rise to a higher level. On the other hand, he was also preparing a congratulatory gift. In order to build momentum for Jean Yi, Jean Kuan actually held a banquet for Jean Yi. Before the banquet began, Jean Kuan specially asked the doctor to come over and examine him. He was also in good spirits. Tonight was a big day, so no matter how angry he was, he wouldn't show it. The Jean family had been operating in Qing City for decades, and their relationships were very complicated. There were also many people. Since Jean Kuan wanted to support Jean Yi, the scene naturally wouldn't be small. It could even be said to be quite a big scene. He first appeared with Jean Yi and introduced him in front of everyone. This was his grandson. In the future, he would be in charge of some of the Jean family's business. When he said this, he didn't have to care about other people's feelings at all. Naturally, he didn't know that other than Jean Yi's father, Jean Ji, the rest of the people present didn't look too good. Especially Jean Lai. His face was so gloomy that it could almost drip blood. Jean Kuan had always been used to being self-centered, not to mention the thoughts of his son and grandson. He had never cared about anyone's thoughts for so many years. However, just when he was having a good time, 2 uninvited guests came to the venue. Jean Kuan, who was originally bringing Jean Yi around the venue to identify people, suddenly had a bad premonition when he saw the people. He instinctively looked at Uncle Chi, but Uncle Chi didn't expect such people to come on such a day. He was stunned for a moment. Soon, the two of them walked to Jean Kuen's wheelchair. Jean Hauser got on the plane. The private plane was already ready and could take off at any time. He was still waiting for the final news. 5 minutes later, it was time to take off, and the news he was waiting for had also come back. Tang Hua hung up the phone and walked towards Jean Hauser with a smile on his face. "Boss, the old man is in the hospital again." Jean Hauser wasn't surprised at all. Ever since Jean Kuen had a stroke last time, his health hadn't been as good as before. If he was provoked again tonight, it would be strange if he didn't go to the hospital. "Boss, do you think the old man will die just like that?" If that was really the case, it would be too easy for Jean Kuen. After so many years, who knew how many bad things he had done? Yet there was no retribution at all. No. Jean Hauser was extremely calm. After a short period of happiness, he was thinking about what they were going to do next. The old man won't die so easily. Even if he was struck by the wind again, or if he fell ill again and couldn't move his entire body, he wouldn't die so easily. After all, the Jean family was relying on him to support it. Jean Kuen knew very well that if he fell, the Jean family would have no leader. When the time came, the people outside would attack them together. Even if the Jean family was big, they wouldn't be able to withstand it easily. What a pity. Tang Hua punched the seat under him. "Boss, you should have killed him directly." Jean Hauser shook his head. Kill Jean Kuen? No. He didn't have that thought yet. His only thought right now was that Jean Kuen couldn't die so easily, because that would be too easy on him. He didn't know how much he hated Jean Kuen. He hated him so much that he wanted to cut him into pieces. Hua, keep an eye on him during this period of time. With such a thing happening to Jean Kuen, I'm afraid the Jean family won't be peaceful either. You have to pay more attention. Don't worry, I know. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hauser. But you, boss, you have to pay more attention. We've been doing so much recently. I'm afraid that the old man will attack you. No. He probably won't have time to deal with me for the time being. Jean Hauser thought of something, and the corners of his lips curled up again. He should be having a headache about the big gift I gave him now. Tang Hua smiled and was relieved. Jean Hauser didn't stay idle even when he was on the plane. He almost didn't rest on the plane. He had been dealing with business. When the plane landed, it was already night time in Lin City. Jean Hauser looked at the time. It was almost 10 o'clock. Tang Hua asked him where he was going. He seemed to have thought of something and answered with 4 words. After he finished speaking, he realized that he was talking about Shi Mingwan's home address. Without taking back his words, the driver drove the car to Yayuan apartment. By the time they arrived at Shi Mingwan's home, it was already past 11 o'clock. "Boss." Tang Hua looked upstairs and then at Jean Hauser. "You?" Jean Hauser got out of the car and turned to look at Tang Hua. "Help me send my luggage back to the apartment and pick me up tomorrow morning." "Boss?" Tang Hua had concerns, but Jean Hauser didn't. He turned around and went upstairs. Standing at Shi Mingwan's door, Jean Hauser closed his eyes. He thought for a moment and took out a bunch of keys from his pocket. If Shi Mingwan saw this, she would definitely scream and scold Jean Hauser for not keeping his word. Jean Hauser didn't have that many concerns. He opened the door with the key and found the direction of the room with familiarity. He had asked before he came. The person he had arranged here told him that Shi Mingwan had already returned to her hometown, so Shi Mingwan was the only one in the apartment now. The living room was very quiet and there was no light at all. The darkness didn't affect Jean Hauser's performance. He just took advantage of the night. He entered Shi Mingwan's room with familiarity. Chapter 691. The room was very quiet, so quiet that he could hear Shi Mingwan's steady breathing. Jean Hauser didn't move either. He just sat there and looked at Shi Mingwan's face. Time passed bit by bit. The east gradually turned white and Shi Mingwan, who was on the bed, turned around. In this way he was completely facing Jean Hauser. He lowered his head and planted a gentle kiss on her forehead. The kiss was very light, like a feather brushing across Shi Mingwan's forehead. She furrowed her brows in her sleep. Jean Hauser didn't smooth her eyebrows. He looked at her for a while, and after confirming that she didn't show any signs of waking up, he got up and left. When he went downstairs, Tang Hua was still waiting. Seeing Jean Hauser's expression, he sighed. "Boss, let's go." Jean Hauser got into the car and looked back at the apartment. "I'm afraid there's going to be a tough battle." He had made so many moves recently. The Jean family probably wouldn't let the matter rest so easily. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to see Shi Mingwan for a while. "Boss." Tang Hua looked at Jean Hauser and sighed in his heart. "You're too tired." Jean Hauser leaned back and closed his eyes to rest. Just when Tang Hua thought that he would not speak, he let out an extremely faint sigh. It doesn't matter. I'm used to it anyway. For so many years he had racked his brains, not daring to relax in the slightest. Whether it was at the Qin family or back to Qingqing. Tang Hua pursed his lips into a straight line and turned his face to signal the driver to drive. His eyes were a little red. After sorting out his emotions, Tang Hua looked at Zhang Haoze again. Where are we going next? Let's go into the company and arrange everything. We'll return to Qing City tonight. Yes. Zhang Haoze had a lot of things to do in the company. In the past few years he had put in a lot of effort to expand his business. He needed to have the strength to fight against the Zhang family in the shortest time possible. Although it was difficult, it was something he had no choice but to do. It took him a day to settle most of the company's affairs and arrange for the people to guard the company. He signed the 2 contracts that were originally scheduled to be signed. From now on he would focus all his energy on Qingqing. That was his main battlefield. Before boarding the plane, he didn't forget to ask Tang Hua about Zhang Kuen's current situation. After our people let Zhang Li and Zhang Yang cause such a ruckus yesterday, the old man was sent to the hospital. It is said that the rescue lasted until the second half of the night. He's still in the ICU. Tang Hua's words were full of schadenfreude, but there was also some worry on his face. Boss, do you think the old man will die just like this? I won't. Zhang Haoze sneered. I told you he still has things to worry about. He won't die just like that. Then should we postpone the plan for now? No need. Zhang Haoze was impatient and didn't want to slow down. Let's see when the old man wakes up. I still have to give them my second big gift. Tang Hua smiled. Big gift? Wasn't this a great gift? The old man would probably faint if he accepted Zhang Haoze's gift. It wasn't that he fainted from happiness but from anger. Zhang Kun was in the ICU. The 2 brothers, Zhang Lai and Zhang Ji, stood guard outside. Zhang Lai sat on the bench and looked anxiously at the emergency room, which was lit up with lights. His wife, Bai Shuqiao, was sitting next to him. She also looked anxious. Compared to them, although the expression on Zhang Ji's face was also very solemn, he didn't look very anxious. He glanced at his son. Zhang Yi understood and turned to walk out. Zhang Li and Zhang Yang blocked in front of him. The 2 of them didn't look very good at this moment. Both of them had bruised noses and swollen faces. Zhang Li's arm was still bandaged. It was obvious that his hand had been broken by someone. Zhang Yang wasn't much better. His face was also covered in injuries. Although there were no obvious fractures and it wasn't as serious as Zhang Li's, the color of his face was really very good looking. These 2 combinations made people feel strange and funny at first glance. However, no one at the scene could laugh. Zhang Yi, where are you going? You're not trying to escape, are you? Although Zhang Li and Zhang Yang weren't the most ideal heirs in Zhang Kuen's eyes. But no matter what, they had grown up with Zhang Lai in the old mansion. These 2 brothers couldn't be said to be close to Zhang Kuen since they were young, but at least they could show their faces in front of Zhang Kuen more than those who couldn't show their faces outside. However, the 2 of them didn't expect Zhang Yi to appear out of nowhere. It was fine if Zhang Yi appeared. The 2 of them had suffered such a big loss at Zhang Yi's hands. Therefore, the 2 of them looked at Zhang Yi with resentment. Zhang Yi wasn't afraid of their provocation at all. He was quite calm. Escape? Do I need to escape? Where do I escape to? It's just that Grandpa told me to do something, although Grandpa is unconscious now. But I still have to finish what Grandpa told me to do. Otherwise, when Grandpa wakes up, he won't be happy. He was still young after all. He was suddenly brought back from the outside. Zhang Yi couldn't control the smugness on his face. Zhang Li and Zhang Yang were furious. Especially Zhang Yang. Zhang Yi, you want to leave just like that? No way. If you don't make things clear today, don't even think about leaving. That's right. If you don't make things clear, don't even think about leaving. Zhang Li glared at Zhang Yi and raised his uninjured hand to point at him. You beat the 2 of us up like this and you want to leave just like that? Yesterday, Zhang Li and Zhang Yang entered the venue with injuries all over their bodies. As soon as they entered the door, they rushed towards Zhang Yi. Although the 2 of them were injured, they won because there were 2 of them. One of them punched Zhang Yi and the other kicked him. Zhang Yi was protected by Zhang Kuen, so he wasn't injured. However, such a good day was ruined by Zhang Li and Zhang Yang. Zhang Kuen couldn't stand such a stimulation, and he didn't expect that the banquet he had meticulously arranged would have such a big mistake. In his anger, he was directly sent to the emergency room. Idiots! Zhang Yi sneered as he looked at the 2 people in front of him. Don't you go out with your brains? Zhang Yi, what do you mean? Zhang Yi, you bastard. Zhang Yang reached out his hand and was about to swing it at Zhang Yi's face again. Zhang Yi barely avoided it. He shook his head and looked at the two idiot brothers in front of him with some mockery. You said I beat you up? Are you saying that I did this to you? Without waiting for the two brothers to speak, Zhang Yi took a step forward. Why don't you think about it? Would I do such a stupid thing? You're basically being used by others without knowing it. If he isn't an idiot, then what is he? Yesterday was the first time Zhang Yi showed his face in front of others. It was supposed to be a great thing. But Zhang Li and Zhang Yang, who were outside, suddenly returned. It was one thing for him to come back, but he was injured all over and even attacked him the moment he arrived. That action was a slap on Zhang Kuen's face. This angered Zhang Kuen. He was so angry that he had to be hospitalized. At that time, Zhang Yi was busy acting as a filial son and grandson in front of the old man. He naturally didn't have the time to bicker with Zhang Li and Zhang Yang. However, he could be considered to have calmed down now. There was someone who wasn't on good terms with him, and was using the Zhang Yang brothers to take care of him. Now that he saw that the two of them still had the time to find trouble with him, Zhang Yi's tone was naturally not very good. If it weren't for your stupidity, Grandpa wouldn't have been sent to the hospital. With the intelligence of the two brothers, they really wouldn't have thought that they had been instigated and used as a tool. Now they heard Zhang Yi blame the reason why Zhang Kuen was unconscious on them. Zhang Li and Zhang Yang's expressions changed. Say that again? They were out on a business trip, and it could be considered that they were exhausted for the Zhang family. But what news did they hear? Zhang Kuen actually recognized the child of another illegitimate child. He even planned to publicly introduce it into the upper class of Qing City? How could they allow such a thing to happen? Therefore, the two brothers hurriedly finished their work and returned to Qing City as soon as possible. They wanted to ask where this Zhang Yi came from. One had to know that all the children of the Zhang family, without Zhang Kuen's acknowledgement, even if their surname was Zhang, it was useless. But when the two of them returned to Qing City, they were beaten up as soon as they got off the plane. The person who beat them up made it very clear that today was Zhang Yi's good day. He told them to be a little more perceptive and not come to cause trouble. This was something that had never happened to Zhang Li and Zhang Yang. Not only was it a great humiliation to be beaten up, but it was also a clear announcement of their status in the Zhang family in the future. How could Zhang Li and Zhang Yang tolerate it? That was why they hurriedly came to teach Zhang Yi a lesson. Yesterday they were still fighting with him. Now that they were provoked by Zhang Yi's words, the two of them stood forward together, intending to teach Zhang Yi a lesson. Zhang Yi wasn't afraid at all. You guys are really stupid. If you have the time to look for trouble with me here, you might as well think about how to find the culprit. Aren't you the culprit? Why are you pretending to be a good person here? Zhang Li and Zhang Yang were furious. The two of them took another step forward, and Zhang Li's hand was almost about to poke Zhang Yi's face. A stupid pig is a stupid pig. It's fine if you're impulsive, but you don't have a brain. Zhang Yi's words angered the two of them. Before they could speak, Bai Shuqiao, who had been silent all this time, couldn't take it anymore and stood up. Enough. She walked in front of Zhang Yi and glared at the person who had snatched her son's position. It's not your turn to make decisions in the Zhang family yet. No matter how bad Zhang Li and Zhang Yang are, they were still raised by the old master. Who do you think you are? Zhang Ji was indignant. The juniors were quarreling, so why did Bai Shuqiao jump out? I say, sister-in-law, although you're the sister-in-law, you have to be reasonable. But you have to be reasonable when you speak and do things. The old master was originally angry because of them. Our Zhang Yi isn't wrong. As one of Zhang Kuen's sons, Zhang Ji was quite capable. Otherwise, how could the old man acknowledge his existence when he had so many illegitimate children outside? But no matter how capable he was, he couldn't withstand the old man wholeheartedly supporting Zhang Lai. But he desperately suppressed his sons who were outside. Now, it wasn't easy for the old man to be willing to help the younger generation. Especially since his son had actually caught the old man's eye. As a father, he naturally had to support his son at this time. They were arguing fiercely on this side, but Uncle Chi could only sigh in his heart when he saw it. How decisive and resourceful was Zhang Kuen back then. But looking at the people of the Zhang family now, other than Zhang Lai who could barely take on the role, none of the remaining third generation could take on a big responsibility. No, there was one. Uncle Chi thought of that person. Although Zhang Kuen didn't like Zhang Haoze, if Zhang Haoze could be used by the Zhang family, the Zhang family could regain its glory in his hands. However, Zhang Kuen's order was to take Zhang Haoze's life. Uncle Chi hadn't had the time to order his subordinates to deal with Zhang Haoze yesterday. He had already prepared the Zhang family's kill order, but now he was a little hesitant. Perhaps there was no need to kill Jean Hausa. The old master didn't have many days left. It was better to think of a way to take Jean Hausa in for his own use. Of course, if he really wanted to achieve that goal, he would probably have to go through some trouble. Uncle Chi thought of this, looked at the people in front of him, and turned around to do what he wanted to do. He had been by Jean Kuen's side for more than 30 years. His words could represent Jean Kuen's intentions. This time he would let him make his own decision. Jean Hausa didn't care about what the Jean family had done because of him. He was busy preparing the second gift. At night, the people of the Jean family were tired of arguing, so they couldn't be bothered to argue anymore. There weren't many who really cared about the old man. When it was time, everyone except Jean Lai went to rest. Jean Lai couldn't take it anymore and went to rest in the middle of the night. To be honest, there were doctors and nurses in the VIP ward. There was no need for them to guard here. But there was only one purpose for these people to guard here. They wanted Jean Kuen to see them first when he woke up. They wanted to get attention and perform well. Jean Lai had been acting as a filial son for a long time. He was sleepy now, so he naturally went to rest. Other than the bodyguards, there was no one else in the ward. Just like last time, Jean Hausa easily entered the ward. But this time the old man didn't wake up. In fact, the stimulation Jean Kuen received this time wasn't as big as the last time, but it was even more serious than the last time. It really wasn't because he saw Jean Li and Jean Yang, the two idiots, attack Jean Yi that he flared up. It was because of this that he thought of the same problem as Uncle Chi, the problem that made him the most frustrated and conflicted. That was, the Jean family had developed for so many years. It had been a 100-year-old family since the late Qing dynasty, but when it came to him, it had actually fallen to the point where there was no successor. How could this not make Jean Kuen depressed? Jean Yi was helpless. He was forced to make this choice. But no matter what, he had taught Jean Li and Jean Yang for a period of time, but they were still so stupid and so disregarding the overall situation. As the head of the Jean family, he wasn't qualified. Even as a descendant of the Jean family, he wasn't qualified. After being provoked like this, Jean Kuen became serious again. He had woken up in the afternoon, but when he woke up, he heard Jean Li and Jean Yang arguing outside about teaching Jean Yi a lesson. As soon as he was provoked, he fainted again. Jean Hausa didn't have much time for Jean Kuen. It was his business if he liked to sleep. His time was very precious. He took a look, picked up a glass of water from the bedside and slowly poured it on Jean Kuen's face. Jean Kuen was old and he hadn't recovered yet. Being splashed with cold water on his face, even though it wasn't cold in this season, made him uncomfortable. He woke up at the first moment and immediately discovered Jean Hausa standing by his bed. Jean Kuen remembered, but his body had just suffered a stroke. How could he have the strength? Jean Hausa casually put the cup in his hand aside. He looked down at Jean Kuen coldly. You, Jean Kuen wiped the water off his face. When he saw Jean Hausa, he was shocked. Didn't he ask Uncle Chi to deal with this person? Why was he still here? What about me? Jean Hausa sneered. I'm here because I have a gift for you. Jean Kuen looked at him defensively. He didn't believe that Jean Hausa would be so kind. You get out. I don't want your gift. Don't you want to hear what I'm giving you? When Jean Hausa spoke, the smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. His entire person looked cold and gloomy. Get out. I don't want to see you. There was killing intent in Jean Kuen's eyes. After today's matter, he would definitely ask Uncle Chi to kill Jean Hausa. I don't want to see you either. I've already said that I'm just here to give you a gift. Jean Hausa looked at his face and said two words very slowly. Jean Kuen's expression changed. He tried to get up. Jean Hausa reached out a hand and pressed it on his chest. Jean Kuen was old, so he couldn't break free at all. You be asterisk starred, let go of me. He cursed, and Jean Hausa's strength increased by 30%. Jean Kuen's face suddenly turned pale. He glared at Jean Hausa, almost glaring a hole in his eyes. Do you know why the celebrity house and the fragrance house were closed? Jean Hausa exerted force in his hand. Looking at Jean Kuen's angry and painful appearance, but he couldn't resist, he only felt happy. One was closed because it was involved in drugs. The other was closed because it was suspected of organizing to sell silver. At this point, Jean Hausa smiled. Next is the Heavenly Fragrance Restaurant, Spring of the Four Seasons. In the future, these businesses will close down in your hands one by one. Are you happy? What Jean Hausa said was all about the Jean family's business that was making a lot of money every day. Every one of them had a chain. They operated different projects and different categories. The only thing they had in common was that these were all profitable businesses. Jean Kuan pointed at Jean Hausa. No one had told him about this matter yet. Must have just happened today. All right. I'm afraid that you'll be too worried and won't be able to recuperate in the hospital. He purposely snored. Since it's a seizure, it'll naturally take a little longer. It's not long to seize it for a year or so, don't you think? B*****. Other than this sentence, Jean Kuan didn't have any other words to curse. Jean Hausa sneered and finally let go of his hand. He took out a handkerchief from his pocket and slowly wiped his hand. In the end, he threw the handkerchief at Jean Kuan's face. Jean Kuan was so angry by his action that he coughed again. Jean Hausa moved his face closer. This is just the beginning. Don't worry. I will definitely destroy the Jean family in my hands. Jean Kuan couldn't even speak properly. He could only point at Jean Hausa and keep panting. Jean Hausa wasn't in the mood to admire his sorry state anymore. He turned around and left. He was about to go downstairs, but he accidentally saw Jean lie in the corridor outside. Seeing the person, Jean Hausa directly walked past him and was about to leave. However, Jean Lai blocked in front of him. Why are you here? As he spoke, he looked in the direction of the ward. He didn't know what Jean Hausa wanted to do. Jean Hausa ignored him and walked past him. Seeing him like this, Jean Lai couldn't help but say, Jean Hausa, no matter what, you're a descendant of the Jean family. You, Mr. Jean, be careful with your words. Jean Hausa stood still and said without turning his head, although my surname is Jean, I'm not a descendant of the Jean family. I'm you? Jean Lai didn't finish his sentence. Jean Hausa suddenly turned around. He reached out and grabbed the front of Jean Lai's shirt. Mr. Jean. He used all his strength. The sinister expression on his face made people think that he was Satan from hell. What are you to me? Say it, why aren't you saying it? Jean Lai shrunk his neck. Facing Jean Hausa's expression, he didn't dare to answer him for a moment. If Mr. Jean wants to live longer, it's better to think clearly. Jean Hausa stood up straight as he spoke. His cold eyes didn't have a trace of warmth. After all, to me, my parents are already dead. Jean Lai's face was a little pale. Jean Hausa let go of his hand and took a step back. He clapped his hands, his gaze cold. If Mr. Jean doesn't know how to speak, I don't mind sending you to meet them in advance. What do you think? Jean Lai's aura was instantly suppressed by Jean Hausa, and he didn't dare to speak again. Jean Hausa looked at him and felt bored. He turned around and left. For the next month, Jean Hausa didn't go anywhere. He stayed in Qing City and focused on dealing with the Jean family's businesses. The Jean family had many businesses, including the entertainment industry, the real estate industry, and the electronics industry. They were all involved in traditional industries. A month wasn't a short time, but the Jean family had too many businesses. With his current ability, it was impossible to destroy the Jean family in a day. He could only destroy them one by one. Jean Hausa had bought a business in Qing City a few years ago. He bought the best location in the Cherry Blossom Villa. During this period of time, he had been living in the Cherry Blossom Villa. On one hand, he had to deal with the Jean family, and on the other hand, he had to prepare to move some of the company's main businesses to Qing City. Jean Hausa didn't expect that after more than a month of silence, someone from the Jean family would actually take the initiative to look for him. Looking at Uncle Chi in front of him, Jean Hausa sat down on the sofa expressionlessly. The Cherry Blossom Villa was decorated according to his preferences. It was simple but grand. Uncle Chi came in and took a few glances. When he saw Jean Hausa, he took 2 steps forward and stood opposite him. Hausa. Uncle Chi was older than Jean Lai. He called Jean Hausa's name to show his friendliness. Unfortunately, the person he met was Jean Hausa. What's the matter? Uncle Chi smiled bitterly in his heart. Jean Hausa had suppressed some of the Jean family's businesses, but now he was asking him what was the matter? Hausa, the Jean family is your family no matter what. What you're doing now isn't appropriate, right? What did I do? Jean Hausa raised his eyebrows as if he didn't quite understand what Uncle Chi meant. I won't repeat what you did. From the celebrity hall until now, many of the Jean family's businesses had been involved. Although it wasn't enough to shake the foundation, as a result, the entire Jean family was indeed in a state of panic. Uncle Chi originally wanted to get someone to make a move on Jean Hausa, but after these days not only did he not make a move, but he also couldn't bear to. Chapter 692. Get the Jean family? Jean Hausa felt that this person was ridiculous. When did he ever want to get the Jean family? Whether it was money or status, he preferred to earn it with his own hands. He didn't want anything from the Jean family. In his heart, There would only be one outcome for the Jean family in the future, and that was to be destroyed by him with his own hands. He was already doing so, and it was only a matter of time before he reached the final step. Even Jean Hausa had to admit that it wasn't unreasonable for Jean Kuin to be ruthless and ruthless. Just look at the power and momentum that the Jean family had developed in his hands all these years. But so what? He was not afraid at all. Did you come here just to talk nonsense? Uncle Chi choked. When he thought of his purpose in coming here, he wanted to explode, but he had no choice but to calm himself down. The Jean family had a large business. I'm sure you've seen the abilities of the other descendants of the third generation. Since that was the case, why not take a step back? Your goal is just to get the Jean family. Now I'll go and convince the old man to give you the Jean family, and you'll stop your actions. How about that? Uncle Chi felt that this was very good. He had followed Jean Kuin for many years and knew Jean Kuen's temper and personality very well. Now Jean Kuin was already so sick. In the past month, if it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't see the Jean family fall in his hands, Jean Kuin would have been completely unable to hold on. Uncle Chi had been holding on to the Jean family's kill order for nearly 2 months, but he hadn't sent it out. It wasn't because he was soft-hearted or because of other reasons. It was just that after weighing the pros and cons, he realized that letting Jean Hausa take over the Jean family was the best outcome. Although he knew that this was the best outcome, all these years he had always been by the Jean family and Jean Kuen's side. His position was the same as Jean Kuen's in some respects. To Jean Hausa, such a big surprise was a great gift. Unfortunately, he didn't know much about Jean Hausa. He thought that Jean Hausa was with Jean Yi and the others. However, he didn't know that in Jean Hausa's heart, nothing could compare to his determination to destroy the Jean family. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes and looked at Uncle Chi's face. Give me the Jean family? Yes. Are you sure? Of course. Uncle Chi still had a trace of pride in his heart. Isn't this your goal? Jean Hausa pursed his lips into a straight line. He looked straight at Uncle Chi, his eyes cold. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes was unbearable. Uncle Chi suddenly realized that something was wrong. No matter what, he was an old man who had been by Jean Kuen's side for a long time. How could he be shocked by the gaze of a junior? But in that instant he actually felt a chill run down his spine. Jean Hausa didn't speak. Uncle Chi swallowed his saliva and tried his best to stabilize his tone. You should know what to do for such a good thing, right? Jean Hausa, who was sitting on the sofa, finally changed his posture. He snapped his fingers. Soon someone came in. Throw it out. These 3 simple words caused Uncle Chi's eyes to widen. He couldn't believe that the face he had been proud of in front of Jean Kuin for half his life had disappeared just like that. Jean Hausa, do you know what you're doing? Uncle Chi's expression changed the moment his arm was lifted. Before he was dragged away, Jean Hausa finally got up. He walked in front of Uncle Chi extremely slowly and looked at Uncle Chi with sinister eyes. I've always known what I'm doing. It's you guys who don't know. I don't care about the Jean family. All I want is to destroy him. Looking at Uncle Chi's shocked eyes, he curled his lips coldly. After all, someone has to be buried with them for what happened back then. Don't you think so? Uncle Chi was really shocked this time. He widened his eyes and looked at Jean Hausa. He couldn't believe that Jean Hausa actually knew what happened back then. What nonsense are you talking about? What happened back then? He wanted to play dumb, but Jean Hausa didn't have the patience to accompany him. He waved his hand and said, throw it out. Uncle Chi, who had been by Jean Kuen's side for half his life, was thrown out just like that. Jean Hausa sat back on the sofa, and Tang Hua entered the door at this moment. He bent down. Boss, Jean Yi asked someone to pass a message that he wants to see you. Jean Yi? Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes and thought of some of Jean Yi's recent actions. He still had some ability, but compared to his determination, it wasn't enough. I won't see him. Jean Hausa stood up. Prepare the plane and fly to Lin City. Let 6th and 7th brother keep a close eye on the rest of the matters here. Yes. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa's expression and had the rare thought of joking with him. Do you want to see sister-in-law? It had been 2 months since Jean Hausa last returned to Lin City. Jean Hausa glared at Tang Hua. He didn't deny it, but his footsteps quickened. In the past 2 months, Shi Mingwan's life had been very smooth. After the French competition, the studio recruited 2 more newcomers. The newcomers' abilities weren't bad. After trying them out for more than 2 months, she realized that they were all promising talents. The design concept and ideas were also very compatible with her. The studio's business was booming, and she also began to get involved in work, making herself busy. Ever since that day, Jean Hausa never came to look for her again. She had dreamed of that man. She dreamed that he had secretly made the key to her house again and came to her house to see her. However, when she woke up, she realized that it was a dream. After she woke up, she even smelled Jean Hausa's aura in the room. This made her wonder if she was hallucinating. Fortunately, she never dreamed of Jean Hausa again after that day. This made her relax, but at the same time she felt a little disappointed. It was impossible to forget, not for the rest of her life. Whether it was their first encounter when she was 12 years old or everything after their reunion. For Shi Mengwan, those were memories engraved in the depths of her heart and couldn't be forgotten. She was still thinking that perhaps she needed more time to force herself to forget everything. However, before she could give herself time to calm down, Mother Shi couldn't sit still anymore. Ever since she saw Jean Hausa last time, Mother Shi had been worried. She originally thought that Shi Mengwan was a child who knew her limits, but she never expected that she would actually have something to do with someone who had a fiancé. This wasn't something Mother Shi could tolerate. After thinking about it, she felt that she had cared too little about Shi Mengwan. So when she returned home, she thought about it carefully and felt that she still had to let Shi Mengwan go on a blind date. The people she knew outside were so unreliable. But a blind date was different. The people she met on a blind date were, firstly, they knew each other well, and secondly, as a mother she could help check them out. What could be more suitable and ideal than this? After thinking it through, Mother Shi took Shi Mengwan's matter to heart. The unlucky one was Shi Mengwan. Her mother arranged blind dates every 2 or 3 days. As for the blind dates, most of them were from the town. Other than the town, there were also some distant relatives who were far away and had no relationship with Shi Mengwan. When they heard that Mother Shi was looking for someone to go on a blind date with Shi Mengwan, they introduced them. From the town, from the county, and from Lin City. Shi Mengwan was extremely annoyed, but she couldn't refuse. As soon as she refused, Mother Shi asked, "Are you still unable to forget that guy surnamed Jean?" As soon as these words came over, in order to prove that she had forgotten about that guy surnamed Jean, Shi Mengwan had been on many blind dates during this period of time. That afternoon she was just about to ask Xiaoji to order takeout. Her phone rang. It was still Mother Shi. Without exception, it was about her blind date again. First she talked about the man's conditions, then how good he was. Of course, all the blind dates, without exception, were able to accept marrying into the family. They were willing to be a live-in son-in-law, and the child they gave birth to would be surnamed Shi. Sometimes Shi Mengwan couldn't help but admire her. Where did her mother find so many people who were willing to agree to her family's conditions? Or could it be that men nowadays had already settled for the next best thing? She heard that the ratio of men to women was out of balance. In 2 years there would be at least 30 million bachelors. In the past, Shi Mengwan didn't believe it, but now that she thought about it, it might really be true. After all, if it weren't for the fact that so many men couldn't get a wife, how could they casually agree to such conditions? She sighed in her heart and finally hung up the phone. However, not long after, her phone rang again. Shi Mengwan was already weak. "Hey, what's wrong?" "Hello, Mom." Afraid that Mother Shi would miss her for a long time again, she spoke first. "I understand. Don't remind me anymore. Tonight at 7 p.m. Starlight Cafe. Don't worry, since I promised you, I will naturally go." However, the person on the other end of the phone was a familiar voice to Shi Mengwan. "Mengwan, are you going on a blind date?" Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. Only then did she realize that she had hung up the phone without looking at the caller ID. "Wan Xianyang? It's me." Wan Xianyang's voice sounded a little mischievous. "Mengwan is going on a blind date, but she actually didn't consider me. It really makes me sad." Wan Xianyang. Shi Mengwan really couldn't respond to this. "You, just cancel your blind date tonight. With me around, what blind date do you need?" "How? That was arranged by my mother." "Do you have Andy's phone number? Do you need me to call her personally to explain?" Wan Xianyang stopped fooling around. How could Shi Mengwan dare to let him contact Mother Shi? It wouldn't be good if there was a misunderstanding. "I'm not fooling around. I'm serious." Wan Xianyang. Shi Mengwan had a headache. "Don't cause trouble. I'll solve it myself." Using the excuse that she was going to eat, Shi Mengwan sent Wan Xianyang away. After hanging up the phone, Shi Mengwan was in a daze for a long time. What she liked didn't like her. What she liked didn't like her. It really was. Shi Mengwan thought about it and didn't continue to take this matter to heart. Right now, she had received another order, and the other party specifically asked her to design it. So she busied herself again. When it was time to get off work, Shi Mengwan, who didn't want to give up, decided to go to Starlight Cafe. Little Ji, Little Chiu, and the others hadn't gotten off work yet. When they saw Shi Mingwan's fearless expression, they were a little amused. It was a secret of the whole studio that Shi Mingwan was forced to go on a blind date. After all, Mother Shi had specially come to the studio before she left last time. Firstly, he wanted to see his daughter's working environment and thank these people for taking care of her. Secondly, he was here to see if there were any suitable candidates for his daughter. Later on, he would call from time to time to arrange blind dates. If Shi Mingwan didn't pick up the phone, someone would pick it up for her. In this way, the entire studio knew about it. Their expressions of watching a good show provoked Shi Mingwan. She gritted her teeth and glared at those people. If you guys keep laughing, you won't get your bonus this month. Xiao Ji and the others didn't dare to laugh. Shi Mingwan finally felt much better. However, he still had no choice but to go to Starlight Cafe. It was said that the location of the blind date was arranged by the blind date. It was quite close to Shi Mingwan's studio. Even if Shi Mingwan was unwilling, she had to admit it. The person arranged by Mother Shi was quite reliable. There were very few weirdos like what they said on the internet. That was true. After Shi Mingwan saw Zhan Haoze, she became paranoid. Although there were quite a few men, they all wanted to dig up the 18 generations of each other's ancestors. Under such circumstances, the blind dates that appeared in front of Shi Mingwan were really acceptable. After entering the door, Shi Mingwan's gaze subconsciously searched for her, who she didn't know was the 18th or 19th blind date. Before she came, Shi Mingwan had already sent the photo to her phone. She hadn't had the time to look at it. Now she took out her phone and took a look. The bespectacled man looked gentle and cultured. He wasn't her type. Now that he was here, she had to meet him. Looking around, she didn't find her blind date. Shi Mingwan picked up a seat and sat down. She picked up her phone and scrolled through Weibo. There was one hot topic today, and it was asking about the weirdo blind dates you've met. Shi Mingwan casually glanced at it and looked at the variety of weirdo men on it. She agreed with Mother Shi's taste a lot. To be honest, if it weren't for the fact that she couldn't forget about Zhan Haoze, she would have randomly picked one of the blind dates that Shi Mingwan had chosen. It wouldn't have been too bad. However, today's blind date didn't appear for a long time. Shi Mingwan looked at the time. It had already been 10 minutes since 7 o'clock, but the blind date hadn't arrived yet. This had never happened before. Could something have happened on the way? Shi Mingwan didn't want to think so, but she still had to think of calling to contact him. However, before she could get through, someone had already sat down opposite her. Mingwan. Wan Xianying was holding a large bouquet of roses in his hand. Looking at Shi Mingwan's surprised face, he smiled brightly. Long time no see. Shi Mingwan wasn't in a hurry to take the flowers that Wan Xianying handed over. She didn't get through, so she was still thinking about continuing. If you want to call your blind date with the surname Chen, you don't have to. Wan Xianying reminded her very kindly, I've already talked to him just now. After he heard that I'm your boyfriend, he was very generous and said that he wished us happiness. Shi Mingwan didn't know what expression she was going to put on anymore. Looking at Wan Xianying, she sighed in her heart. Wan Xianying, actually, you don't have to do this. I can handle it. Wan Xianying frowned. Do you think I'm trying to help you get rid of your blind date? Isn't it? Of course not. Wan Xianying stood up angrily, then quickly sat down again. He put the bouquet of flowers aside and looked at Shi Mingwan's face very seriously. I'm serious. Since you want to go on a blind date, why didn't you consider me? Would I be worse than those blind dates? Stop fooling around. It was that bespectacled man just now. He didn't even do anything. He just shook his fist and the other party retreated. How could such a man be worthy of Wan? I didn't mean that. Then what did you mean? Wan Xianying originally didn't plan to meet Shi Mingwan this time. After all, he could only stay in Lin City for 2 days this time, and there were still many things he hadn't done. However, he originally wanted to make a call to make his presence known in front of Shi Mingwan, but he didn't expect to hear about Edith, which she was going on a blind date. We're not suitable. What's not suitable? Wan Xianying didn't understand. You're talking about family background. My family isn't the kind of family that looks after their disciples. Our Wan family also has a precedent of marriage alliances with small families. You're talking about feelings. I'm sincere to you. Isn't that better than those blind dates that we've only met a few times? Besides, even if you feel that you won't have a partner when you marry to Rong City and are unwilling, don't you still have sister-in-law? Wu Jiniao and I are childhood friends. If you really get together with me, won't you be able to keep sister-in-law company? I really can't think of how I'm not as good as those blind dates of yours. Ever since they met, Wan Xianying had always been gentle and polite. His humor didn't hide his utilitarian nature as a businessman. However, it was the first time Shi Mingwan had seen Wan Xianying say such a long string of words in one breath. She shifted her gaze slightly and looked at the bouquet of red roses. Because you'll never be able to meet my conditions. What do you mean? Wan Xianying didn't quite understand. On one hand, Shi Mingwan really wanted him to give up, and on the other hand she was also very serious about her conditions. My mother and my father only had 2 daughters, me and my sister. And I promised my parents that if I want to get married in the future, I'll find a son-in-law. Son-in-law? Wan Xianying's expression was a little strange. What do you mean? That's right. Our family wants our son-in-law to marry into our family. The child we give birth to will have my surname. Shi Mingwan's words were especially firm. This time Wan Xianying wasn't in a hurry to speak. He sat on the chair as if he didn't expect Shi Mingwan to say such a thing. Are you joking with me? No. Shi Mingwan shook her head. I'm serious. Seeing that Wan Xianying still hadn't reacted, she said very softly, Wan Xianying, don't waste time on me. I know your identity very well, so I know that your family won't let you be a son-in-law, and it's even more impossible for the child you give birth to have my surname. Since you know it's impossible, why are you so obsessed with me? Shi Mingwan hadn't specially inquired about Wan Xianying's family background, but there were some things that she didn't need to inquire about to know. Wu Jingyao's childhood friend had quite an impressive family background. The antique shop under his name was almost making a lot of money every day. He had a family background and he had an external appearance. How could such a man agree to marry into the family? Shi Mingwan said all she had to say. She took advantage of Wan Xianying's daze to stand up. She said that she was going to the bathroom, but she was actually giving Wan Xianying time to digest her words. She believed that Wan Xianying understood and might leave later. She went into the bathroom and washed her face to calm down. No matter what, today's blind date was avoided. After all, with Wan Xianying around, she didn't need to send away the previous blind date. However, she was happy too early. The water on her face hadn't dried yet when Mother Shi called. What's wrong with you? Are you with that Zhang guy again? Why did I hear that you didn't go on a blind date properly, but got someone to chase that person away? Mom, it's nothing like that. If it's not Zhang, then who is it? Wan, don't tell me you didn't want to go on a blind date so you found a random man to brush me off? I didn't, Mom. Shi Mingwan felt that sometimes she really couldn't talk to Mother Shi. While she was still thinking about how to explain, she kept walking forward. She walked a little too fast and didn't notice that there was someone in front of her. The moment her body bumped into someone, the phone in her palm almost flew out. When the phone left her palm, Shi Mingwan wanted to grab it, but the person was one step ahead of her. He caught the phone and placed it in her hand. Shi Mingwan stood there and subconsciously pinched it, but she couldn't care less about listening to Mother Shi's words. She just stared blankly at the person in front of her. The two of them hadn't seen each other for almost 2 months. The man in front of her was still tall, but his expression was tired. He had also lost a lot of weight. At this moment he was looking at her. His eyes were curved and he seemed to be full of gentleness. Shi Mingwan was shocked by his gaze. She even forgot that Mother Shi was still talking on the other end of the phone. It wasn't until Mother Shi roared again that she casually said that she had something to do and hung up the phone. Just as she hung up the phone, her body was pulled into the arms of the man in front of her. He hugged her a little hard, but he restrained himself from hurting her. He gently rubbed his chin against the top of her hair. Shi Mingwan's body stiffened. She didn't expect Zhang Haoze to appear in front of her again. Wan. She heard his voice. I miss you so much. It was a gentle voice without a trace of hostility. Accompanied by his hug, he revealed his intentions in such a simple manner. Shi Mingwan couldn't move for a moment. She thought that it might be because she had suppressed herself too much for the past 2 months, so she was hallucinating. Otherwise, why would she see Zhang Haoze in broad daylight? It was one thing to see Zhang Haoze, but to see such a gentle Zhang Haoze. You? She wanted to speak. Her lips moved, but she didn't know what to say. Zhang Haoze gently tightened his arms and hugged her waist. He used half of his strength to pull her body closer to him. Wan, I miss you so much. He said it again. The weather in Lin City was getting colder, but it wasn't cold. The man was wearing a shirt and no tie. The temperature of his chest was burning her face. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at him. He was also looking at her. The moment their eyes met, he lowered his head and accurately kissed her lips. At that moment, Shi Mingwan seemed to see fireworks exploding in the sky. Chapter 693. Like in love couldn't be restrained. No matter how hard you tried when you liked someone, you couldn't hide your eyes or your expression. No matter how much homework you did and how much psychological preparation you had, it was useless. That low voice of "I miss you" made sure Mingwan lose all her armor. She had thought many times that she might meet him again, but she didn't expect to meet him like this. She thought that 2 months was enough for her to do psychological preparation, enough for her to forget the person in front of her, and then she could return to her usual indifference. But when she really met him, she realized that her heartstrings were pulled and she couldn't control them at all. Smelling the familiar scent on his body and feeling the warmth brought by their lips and teeth, for a moment, she couldn't extricate herself. The dizziness only lasted for a moment. Sure, Mingwan heard footsteps in the distance. She suddenly came back to her senses and pushed John Hausa away forcefully. She took a big step back. Because she retreated too quickly, Sure Mingwan's back hit the wall behind her. She felt a little pain, so she stabilized her body and stared at the man in front of her. Her gaze was very complicated. She lowered her eyes and after a few breaths, the trace of charm just now completely dissipated. When she looked up again, Sure Mingwan's eyes were filled with rationality and not a trace of emotion. An uncontrollable kiss was already the limit she could give. She couldn't do or afford to give more. She looked at Jean Hausa warily and turned around to leave. However, Jean Hausa blocked in front of her. Wan. Didn't she like him just now? Jean Hausa, we've already broken up. Sure Mingwan said this very calmly. Jean Hausa's eyes darkened. Wan, I didn't agree. That's your business. I thought we had already reached a tacit understanding. Wan. Sorry, I won't be entangled with a man who has a fiancé. Sure Mingwan's attitude was firm. Jean Hausa went forward to stop her, but his phone rang just now. The number on it made him have no choice but to answer the call first. It was at this moment that Sure Mingwan left the corridor. When Jean Hausa hung up the phone and walked out, he couldn't see Sure Mingwan anymore. Of course, Wan Xianying also disappeared. Sure Mingwan sat in her car and looked at Wan Xianying, who got into the car uninvited. She felt a little helpless. She thought she had made herself clear. In fact, the 2-year agreement that Sure Mingwan mentioned at that time was indeed to shut Grandma Sure's mouth and stop her from having the idea of letting her parents adopt a child. But the other reason was that she wasn't sure how far she could go with Jean Hausa. Before that, she didn't want to get married, nor did she want to fall in love. He could use this as an excuse to avoid a lot of trouble. However, she didn't expect her mother to be so capable. Not only was she not repelled by her excuses and reasons, but she also found suitable men to go on blind dates with her again and again. On this point she was really convinced. The car stopped at her apartment and she looked at Wan Xianying helplessly. She had just said that she was not feeling well and wanted to go home to rest. Wan Xianying suggested that he send her home, no matter how she refused. When she reached the parking lot, he took her car keys and got in the car. Since you're not feeling well, let me drive. He knew that this was just her excuse, but Sure Mingwan really couldn't kick him out of the driver's seat. I'm already home. As Sure Mingwan spoke, she reached out her hand to Wan Xianying, gesturing for him to get out of the car and return the car keys to her. Wan Xianying got out of the car, but he didn't return the car keys to her. He was also very tall and he just stood in front of the car and looked at Sure Mingwan. That marrying into the family was something you deliberately made to make things difficult for me, right? What era was it now? Who would make such a request? Sure Mingwan's expression didn't change. She was very clear about Wan Xianying's family background. He was Hua Jinyao's childhood friend, so he probably wouldn't be too bad. No. I'm serious. Wan Xianying looked at her, seemingly a little conflicted. Seriously speaking, putting aside the 1 or 2 illegitimate children his old man had accidentally created outside. His mother only gave birth to him. He didn't even have a sister or brother, so he had a very good relationship with Hua Jinyao and the others. Sure Mingwan's condition really stumped him. Even if he was willing, his parents wouldn't agree. Wan Xianying had a headache now. Even if this was indeed Sure Mingwan's condition to make things difficult for him, he couldn't do it. Mingwan, what do you think? Let's each take a step back. Sure Mingwan looked at him, not understanding what he meant by taking a step back. If you're willing to agree to be with me, we can have 2 children. One will take your surname and the other will take my surname. How about that? Sure Mingwan looked at Wan Xianying. At a certain moment she was really touched. With Wan Xianying's family background and status, to be able to say such words was already a lot of sincerity. Wan Xianying, thank you. Sure Mingwan thanked him sincerely. Thank you so much. She didn't say more, but what else did Wan Xianying not understand? Yes, thank me, but you can't accept me. Right? Wan Xianying, Mengwan, tell me the truth. Wan Xianying thought of what he had seen in France and some of the things that happened later. Do you have someone in your heart? Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. When she met Wan Xianying's clear eyes, she hesitated for a second and quickly nodded. Yes, I have someone I like. Wan Xianying looked as if he had expected it. No wonder. The atmosphere was a little silent. Shi Mengwan didn't know what she could say. She stood there feeling a little awkward. It's fine. Wan Xianying was much calmer than her. I saw it a long time ago. Shi Mengwan's expression was strange. Wan Xianying smiled softly. If you don't have someone you like, why can't you see an outstanding man like me? Don't you think so? His words made the expression on Shi Mengwan's face relax a little. She chuckled. Because I'm blind. When she smiled, Wan Xianying also relaxed. There were some things that he didn't say after seeing through, but if he really said it, it would be better. All right. Then I hope you won't be blind for too long, Wan Xianying continued. Otherwise the fake blind will become really blind. After rejecting Shi Mengwan's suggestion to send him back, Wan Xianying walked out of the neighborhood and left. Shi Mengwan looked at his back view, and the corners of her lips pursed into a straight line again. After being entangled with Zhang Haoze for such a long time, she couldn't break it off and it was still messy. After going back and forth so many times, wasn't she just blind? It was just that she didn't feel like she could control her heart. Moreover, her feelings for Zhang Haoze weren't as simple as just being attracted to him. After more than a year of relying on each other, she had never forgotten the care and companionship she had once had. She shook her head and didn't let herself think of Zhang Haoze again. No matter how difficult some things were, she had to learn to let go. Shi Mengwan didn't see Zhang Haoze come looking for her that night, which made her feel relieved again. Her personality could be considered flamboyant, and her willpower could definitely be considered firm. However, all her rationality would become vulnerable in front of Zhang Haoze. Perhaps she needed to stay away for a while? Why not fly to Rong City for a few days after she was done with this job? Not only could she accompany Su Qingsang, but she could also avoid Zhang Haoze? Shi Mengwan had a good idea, but she didn't expect to see Zhang Haoze guarding the door the next morning when she opened the door to go to work. Seeing that it was him, Shi Mengwan subconsciously took a step back, but when she thought that she had to go to work, she took another step forward. This step back and forward allowed her to stand in front of Zhang Haoze. His tall stature made the entire door look extremely cramped. He also successfully blocked Shi Mengwan's way out. Zhang Haoze, please move aside. I want to go out. I bought you breakfast. Zhang Haoze acted as if he didn't see her cold face. You probably haven't had breakfast yet. Go to school after you eat. Shi Mengwan stared at the bag in Zhang Haoze's hand. The logo on it was a very famous Hong Kong-style breakfast restaurant in Lin City. Retracting her gaze, Shi Mengwan's hand clenched the bag tightly. No need, thank you. I've eaten. Please move aside. His stiff tone was an obvious rejection, but in Zhang Haoze's eyes such a rejection wasn't thorough enough. He suddenly moved his face closer to Shi Mengwan. His sudden action startled Shi Mengwan, and her body naturally took a step back. Zhang Haoze used the hand that wasn't carrying breakfast to place on her waist to stabilize her body. At the same time, he continued to move forward in front of her. The tip of his nose gently swept past her lips, and finally, he hugged her waist and took a step forward. The two of them stood together in the room. Zhang Haoze hooked the tip of his foot and easily closed the door. Let's have breakfast. He raised the bag in his hand. Zhang Haoze. Shi Mengwan pulled his hand away and said angrily, I've eaten. You've eaten? Are you sure? There's nothing to be uncertain about. Zhang Haoze faced her and bent down again. Your mouth is full of the smell of toothpaste, but there's no taste of breakfast. He said such frivolous words with a serious expression, which made Shi Mengwan's face turn red. She bit her lip and pursed her lips tightly. After realizing what she had done, she loosened her grip a little. Zhang Haoze, are you all right? Even if I haven't eaten, what does it have to do with you? I can go to the studio to eat. Can you move aside now? Zhang Haoze didn't move aside. He grabbed her hand and led her to the dining table. He was much stronger than her. Shi Mengwan tried a few times but she couldn't break free. She could only let him pull her away. Zhang Haoze placed the bag in his hand on the table, opened it and took out several lunch boxes from inside. He placed them out one by one. Let's eat. Shi Mengwan was finally able to break free from his hand when he placed the lunch boxes. She took a step back and stood about a meter away from Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser, we've already broken up. If he didn't hear it clearly yesterday, she didn't mind saying it again today. Jean Hauser turned around and faced the coldness in her eyes. He took a step forward and stood in front of her. I didn't agree. I don't need your consent. She had already decided and wouldn't change it. Wanwan, do you have to do this? Jean Hauser, do you have to do this? Sure, Mingwan had a headache. She was really trying hard to control herself, and she was also trying hard to forget him. Why did he still have to appear? You go. Sure, Mingwan took a step back and pointed in the direction of the door. She didn't want this. She didn't like him coming and going as he pleased. If he couldn't afford the feeling she wanted, then he shouldn't provoke her anymore. Jean Hauser's brows furrowed tightly. Wanwan. He wanted to explain himself, but his phone rang again. He glanced at Shi Mengwan and picked up the phone. The news from the other end of the phone made his expression change. He glanced at Shi Mengwan with a serious expression. I'll be right there. After hanging up the phone, he put away his phone and looked at Shi Mengwan. I have something urgent to deal with. I have to go out now. No matter how unhappy you are, you still have to eat breakfast. After saying this, he resisted the urge to hug Shi Mengwan. Instead, he left in a hurry. Shi Mengwan looked at his back and felt the seriousness in his words just now. Although he hadn't appeared during this period of time, he had obviously lost some weight today. Jean Hauser's footsteps were a little fast, so fast that Shi Mengwan didn't even have time to ask him what had happened. However, her intuition told her that this matter wasn't ordinary. When the car stopped at the entrance of the first hospital, Tang Hua had already come out. When he saw Jean Hauser, he walked in front of him in a few steps. The car accident happened an hour ago. At that time, Miss Chen was about to go to work. Just as she was about to reach the Chen Corporation's building, a car rushed out from the corner and hit Miss Chen's car. Tang Hua said very clearly, I've already called the police and the car that caused the accident has been detained, but I think it's not ordinary. He didn't say the rest, but the meaning was quite clear. This accident wasn't an accident, but man-made. Jean Hauser didn't ask further and went straight into the hospital. When he went in, Qin Feifei was still being resuscitated. He couldn't ask how the doctor was doing. Not long after, Qin Yongchang also came. The moment he came for Jean Hauser. Without giving Jean Hauser a chance to speak, he directly waved his fist at him. However, before his fist could touch Jean Hauser had already taken a step back to avoid it. Qin Yongchang was very angry. He pointed his finger at Jean Hauser. Ungrateful. You're ungrateful. I want you to take good care of Feifei. Is this how you take care of her? It's fine if you don't show up, but as soon as you show up, you sent Feifei to the hospital? Uncle, don't call me that. I can't afford it. Qin Yongchang was really angry. Jean Hauser couldn't refute it, and he didn't intend to defend himself. He had already asked Tang Hua to investigate why such a thing happened. The specific situation would have to wait for Tang Hua to finish investigating. However, he didn't wait for Tang Hua to give the results of the investigation. Jean Hauser's phone rang again. There were a few photos on the screen. One was of Qin Feifei getting into a car accident this morning, and another was of him and Qin Feifei together. There was also a photo of Qin Feifei alone. 3 photos and a sentence. It's not over yet. Jean Hauser's heart skipped a beat. There was no need to wait for the results of the investigation. This was the work of the Jean family. He had thought that Jean Kuan and Uncle Qi might retaliate, but he didn't expect that the other party would actually target Qin Feifei. No, he shouldn't be surprised. This was more like their style of doing things. Jean Hauser held his phone with a solemn expression. He turned around and was about to leave, but was stopped by Qin Yongchang. Where are you going? Where else can you go? Let me tell you, I won't let this matter go just like that. You must give our Feifei an explanation. Jean Hauser was silent. He couldn't give him an explanation. The only thing he could do was to avenge Qin Feifei so that those blind people wouldn't come to his door to cause trouble. Uncle, don't worry. I will give you an explanation. This time, Jean Hauser wasn't in a hurry to leave. He waited outside the resuscitation room for Qin Feifei to wake up. After the doctor rescued her, he told them that Qin Feifei was out of danger. Now there was no problem for the time being. Jean Hauser heaved a sigh of relief. But he couldn't completely relax. Qin Feifei's injuries weren't serious. She would be fine after a few days of rest. In his opinion, this didn't seem like they were deliberately trying to kill Qin Feifei. Instead, it seemed like they were giving him a warning. Realizing this, Jean Hauser suddenly had a bad premonition. Soon he received a new text message on his phone. Do you feel relieved? Jean Hausa, don't be happy too early. Do you think that just because you found a shield we won't know who you really want to protect? Jean Hausa's heart skipped a beat. He almost immediately thought of Shi Mengwan. With this thought he couldn't sit still anymore. He didn't care how long it would take for Chen Feifei to wake up. He hurriedly turned around to look for Shi Mengwan. Nothing could happen to Shi Mengwan. Along the way he kept urging the driver to drive faster. A little faster. His phone didn't ring again, but this kind of moment was even more torturous. His hand on his knee clenched tightly into a fist. He was still careless. He should have been more reliable. Shi Mengwan didn't eat the breakfast prepared by Jean Hausa. But she really wasn't a wasteful person. After thinking about it, she brought breakfast to the company and directly distributed it to the other people in the studio. But even so, she still felt that it wasn't enough. There was a ball of fire in her heart. That ball of fire made her want to burn Jean Hausa regardless of anything else. She was still thinking about how she should face Jean Hausa the next time he came, or whether she should use a more intense method. No matter what, she couldn't continue like this. Just as she made up her mind, she forced herself to divert her attention and stop thinking about Jean Hausa. On the other end, Jean Hausa suddenly rushed into her office. Xiaoji followed behind Jean Hausa and looked at her helplessly. Her expression was slightly conflicted. Sister Shi, I can't stop him. Jean Hausa heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Shi Mengwan was safe and sound. He went forward to hug her. He needed to confirm her safety, but Shi Mengwan suddenly raised her hand and placed it on his chest. Anger gradually appeared on her face again. Chapter 694. Shi Mengwan refused to be entangled like this. She needed to forget Jean Hausa in the shortest time possible, and not let him appear in front of her again and again. However, Jean Hausa acted as if he didn't notice the ugly expression on her face. He suddenly reached out and held her in his arms. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She wanted to push him away, but he hugged her very tightly. Jean Hausa's chin touched the top of Shi Mengwan's hair. Smelling the fragrance of her hair, he felt his mood slowly calm down. He tightened his grip on her waist. The feeling of worrying that something would happen to her made him lose his mind for a moment. Shi Mengwan didn't let him hug her for too long. She suddenly raised her elbow and slammed it hard into his chest. Jean Hausa wasn't prepared for her to attack him. He took 2 steps back and let go of her at the same time. Shi Mengwan took a deep breath. Her willpower really wasn't strong, especially every time she encountered something related to Jean Hausa. But this didn't mean that she was someone without a bottom line or principles. On the contrary, it was precisely because she had principles and bottom lines that she couldn't accept Jean Hausa's actions. Jean Hausa, do you have to do this? Did he have to use such a method to constantly get close to her and shake her willpower? Jean Hausa thought about Chen Feifei's car accident, and his brows furrowed tightly. Those explanations weren't easy to say, and he didn't want her to know about those worries. However, looking at Shi Mengwan's clueless expression, he hesitated again. He didn't speak, and Shi Mengwan didn't know what she could say, so she also remained silent. In the silence, the two of them faced each other. After a few minutes, Shi Mengwan finally couldn't stand the situation in front of her. She didn't want to speak anymore, nor did she look at Jean Hausa. She turned around and returned to her seat. She still had an order to finish. She wanted to finish it quickly so that she could go to Rong City to see Su Qingsang. Although she didn't lack people to take care of her now, and she was a doctor in the obstetrics and gynecology department, she still wanted to see her with her own eyes and make sure that she was safe. Just as her hand touched the mouse, Jean Hausa walked in front of her. He held her hand, making it impossible for her to continue for a while. Jean Hausa. Even if he was crazy, he should have had enough, right? Come with me to Qingqing. He wanted to go to Qing City to personally solve the problems of the Jean family. Before that, he had to put her in front of him, under his eyes, before he could feel at ease. Shi Mengwan blinked. For a moment, she thought that the man in front of her was possessed. What did you say? Come with me to Qingqing. As if he was afraid that Shi Mengwan didn't understand, he didn't mind explaining more clearly. My father is from Qing City. My home is also in Qingqing. I want to take you back. Shi Mengwan looked at his hand that was holding hers and chuckled. You mean bring my parents? Jean Hausa frowned. He didn't mean that. In his heart, no one in the Jean family was qualified to be the head of the family. You don't need to see them. In Jean Hausa's heart, they were just a group of unimportant people. In fact, between him and Jean Kuan, it was a matter of life and death. Shi Mengwan misunderstood his meaning. She couldn't tell what she was thinking. The only thing she could be sure of was that Jean Hauser had never thought of bringing her to meet his family. Jean Hauser, you should go. I won't go to Qing City with you. She had heard from Shi Mingwan that Jean Hauser's father had married another woman and had a stepmother. She reckoned that it wasn't just a stepmother. The stepmother might have her own children. Under such circumstances, Jean Hauser's relationship with his family was definitely not good. She wouldn't really ask to see his family. However, Jean Hauser's words just now made her feel a little uncomfortable. Since he didn't want to bring her to Qing City to meet his family, why did he say that he wanted to bring her to Qing City? She pulled her hand back from Jean Hauser's hand. The wariness on Shi Mingwan's face was even more obvious than before. Wan. The expression on Jean Hauser's face became more and more conflicted. He wanted to mention it more or less, but he didn't know where to start. I still have something to do. If there's nothing else, President Jean, please leave. As she spoke, she focused her attention on the screen in front of her again. Jean Hauser was about to say something when his phone rang again. It was Tang Hua. He brought 2 pieces of news. Those 2 pieces of news made Jean Hauser's expression change slightly. After hanging up the phone, he looked at Shi Mingwan. She was staring at the screen intently. The mouse on her hand clicked a few times as if she wasn't affected by him at all. Jean Hauser couldn't say the rest of his words. Wan, I might be busy for a while. When I'm done, I'll come pick you up and take you to Qing City. No need. Shi Mingwan didn't even raise her head. I'm not interested. Her cold tone was full of resistance. Jean Hauser was helpless. Moreover, it was indeed a troubled time. He could only leave first. Wan, wait for me. I'll definitely come pick you up. At that time, if everything was settled, it would be easier to pick her up and take her to Qing City. Shi Mingwan acted as if she didn't hear him and was still focused on the work at hand. However, after Jean Hauser left, she put down the mouse and looked at an unknown point in the distance. No one knew what she was thinking. Jean Hauser left the office building. Tang Hua had already parked the car downstairs. He quickly got into the car. Tang Hua looked a little anxious. Boss, what do you think we should do about this? That old fart, Jean Kuan, actually issued a kill order for boss. Even though such a kill order was only issued within the Jean family. But what kind of family was the Jean family? In the early years, they relied on doing some unorthodox businesses to bring the Jean family to its current state. The Jean family had their own assassin hall. They might not be comparable to the top professional assassins in the world, but they were still quite powerful. All these years, Jean Kuan had used this assassin hall to get rid of many of his thorns. Now Jean Kuan had actually used such a kill order on him. It wasn't a warning, nor was it a warning. He really wanted his life. Jean Hauser's expression had a rare trace of seriousness. Previously he thought that Chen Feifei's injury was a warning to him, but now that he thought about it, it wasn't. Thinking back to what Uncle Chi said when he came looking for him last time, he seemed to understand a little. Whether it was the 2nd or 3rd generation of the Jean family, they didn't have a worthy successor. Jean Kuan was already old. It wouldn't be that easy for the Jean family to continue the glory of the past few decades. Uncle Chi was probably behind Jean Kuan's back and wanted him to take up the mantle of the Jean family. However, he didn't know that his hatred for the Jean family and Jean Kuan had already been carved into his bones. No matter what the Jean family did, he remained unmoved. Boss. He didn't say anything. Tang Hua was a little worried. Go back to Qing City. Jean Hauser quickly made a decision within a few seconds. Tang Hua wasn't surprised. But if we leave, what about Chen Feifei? Actually, he wanted to ask, what about Shi Mingwan? The people from the Jean family were just flustered for a moment. They weren't stupid. When they reacted, they would definitely understand that Chen Feifei was just a shield. She was useless at all. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes as if he had thought of something. Let's go. We'll go to the hospital before returning to Qing City. No matter what, Chen Feifei's injury this time was because of him. After all, the Chen family had saved his life. He still had to give them an explanation. The weather in Qing City had already started to turn cold. Jean Hauser sat in the car and watched as the driver shook off the tail behind him for the 13th time. He glanced at the traffic behind him. Ahua, how's the old man doing recently? He's still hanging on by a thread. He had already suffered 2 strokes, and this stroke had brought about quite serious consequences. However, Jean Kuan was lucky. He didn't die even though he was like this. He still had time to deal with Jean Hauser? It was really because his previous movements were too light. Tell old 6 and old 7 to move faster. Although this was a little forceful, he had no other choice at this time. Tang Hua nodded in understanding. Okay, I believe that 6th and 7th brothers will arrange it well. Hopefully. Jean Hausa hoped so, but he couldn't really let down his guard completely. In fact, the Jean family had been operating in Qing City for decades. Their power was deeply rooted, and it really wasn't something that could be completely destroyed in a short period of time. He had underestimated his enemy before. But no matter what, he wouldn't stop, even if this process was more difficult than he had thought. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes, his expression full of danger. Jean Kuan was a very subjective and very assertive person. In his heart, if there was someone who didn't do what he wanted, then it must be someone else's fault, not his. He never reflected on his own problems, so naturally, he wouldn't feel that it was his fault that the son he had taught was now reduced to a housewife with a woman. This was that woman's fault, it was that woman's problem. She was the one who seduced his son, and she was the one who made Jean Lai become like this. Since Jean Kuan had been in a shady business back then, he wasn't just ordinarily ruthless. When he knew that that woman had caused his son to become like this, he had the intention to kill her. Towards that woman. He had to get rid of her. But at first he didn't find an opportunity to do so. Jean Lai's maternal family seemed to know something, and they were still very protective of this grandson and his grandson's child. He didn't have a chance to do so for a while, but it didn't mean that he would never have a chance to do so. He decided to wait for a while, wait for a suitable opportunity, and then get rid of that woman. At first he didn't wait for an opportunity, which made him depressed. Later he didn't even hesitate to bring Zhang Ji and Min Quan to his side, thinking of nurturing them for a period of time. But with Jean Lai in front of him, the other illegitimate children naturally couldn't satisfy Jean Kuan. The more dissatisfied he was, the more he hated Jean Lai's wife. Later, Jean Kuan's opportunity finally came. Because of the change of power. Jean Lai's maternal family had encountered some trouble. He couldn't care less about Jean Lai for the time being. For Jean Kuan this was an opportunity. Previously, because he was worried about Jean Lai's maternal family, he didn't make a move. Now that something had happened to Jean Lai's maternal family, his opportunity had come. At this time, Jean Lai and his wife had already been living outside for several years. The family of 3 lived the most ordinary life in another city. Jean Kuan, who saw the investigation information again, was still extremely angry. Because after so many years he hadn't picked out a child who could inherit his career. Jean Lai, who could inherit his career, was bewitched by a woman. He couldn't tolerate it. Jean Kuan decided to get rid of that woman. Before getting rid of her, he went to the door with the last trace of father-son relationship. In the beginning, Jean Kuan decided to be polite before using force. If Jean Lai was willing to go home with him obediently, then he could only kill that woman and let him bring that bastard home. But if Jean Lai didn't listen to him, then don't blame him for being impolite. When Jean Kuan came to the door, Jean Lai was naturally very surprised. He had no idea that his father had actually targeted him a few years ago. Jean Lai was still happy to see his father. But that happiness didn't last long. Jean Lai, you disappoint me too much. Ever since he was young, Jean Kuan, who had always been cold-blooded and indifferent, still put on such a face. Dad, don't call me. Jean Kuan was very angry. For a woman, where did you put the honor of the Jean family in our family? Jean Lai was silent. He had indeed let down Jean Kuan's nurturing. However, Dad, Ruoliu is a good woman. If you had really come into contact with her, you would definitely like her. Impossible. It's true. Jean Lai was still too naive. At this time he was still trying to convince Shi Kuan to accept his wife. Ruoliu is a very good woman. Dad, you really? Shut up. Jean Kuan glared at his son in front of him, wishing he could strangle him to death. However, the purpose of his visit today wasn't to argue with his son. Jean Kuan's face was cold. He took out a gun and threw it in front of Jean Lai. Take it. Dad? Jean Kuan was shocked. He wasn't unfamiliar with guns, but after leaving the Jean family, he hadn't touched one for many years. You're my son. You can't be so cowardly, right? Jean Kuan sneered. Don't say that I, your father, didn't give you a chance. What do you mean, Dad? Pick it up. Jean Kuan shouted. Jean Lai hesitated for a moment, but in the end he still picked up the gun. That. Kill her? As Jean Kuan spoke, he pointed at Xiao Ruoliu, who had just come down from upstairs and had just settled her bad boy. That. Jean Lai had been living too comfortably in the past few years. It was so comfortable that he had forgotten what the Jean family relied on to make their fortune. He looked at the gun in his hand, then at Jean Kuan. In the end, as if he was throwing a hot potato, he threw the gun out and threw it on the coffee table. Are you crazy? Jean Lai's expression was full of shock and accusation. I'll say. Jean Kuan looked at his useless child and pushed the gun to Jean Lai's side again. Didn't you say that you wanted to go back to the Jean family? Since that's the case, then kill this woman. If she dies, you can go back to the Jean family. Dad. If you say that, I won't go back to the Jean family for the rest of my life. Chapter 695. Jean Hauser woke up from his dream with a start. The gunshot seemed to still be lingering in his ears. His head hurt a little. He rubbed his temples, but he couldn't suppress the headache no matter what. Ever since he returned to Qingqing, he couldn't restrain the nightmares from that day. Even if he wanted to resist, it would be useless. He got up and looked at the gloomy night sky outside. He took out his phone, unlocked it, and looked at Shi Mingwan's number on it. In the end, he didn't pull it out. At dawn, he woke up early and went to the gym downstairs to work out. He was used to getting up early. He had the habit of doing morning exercises every day. Not only morning exercises but also boxing. The security of Sakura Manor was quite good. Moreover, he had arranged many people to guard this villa, both openly and secretly. When he came out of the gym, the staff had already prepared breakfast. He finished reading the financial news while eating breakfast. As soon as he put down the bowl in his hand, Tang Hua entered the door with a rare solemn expression. Boss, something happened to sixth brother. Jean Hauser looked at Tang Hua with a malicious expression. What's going on? Speak clearly. Last time, you asked sixth brother to keep an eye on the club under the Jean family's name. You seem to have found a breakthrough. The day before yesterday he told me that he wanted to go in and take a look. But until today I haven't received any news from him. Tang Hua's face was a little anxious. This group of people had been together since they were young, so they were clear about their character. Boss, Old Six isn't someone who doesn't know what's important. If nothing had happened to him, no matter what, there would definitely be news. Now that there's been no news from him for an entire day, I'm afraid. Tang Hua didn't say it out loud, but he believed that Jean Hauser would understand. Jean Hauser was silent. He thought about Uncle Chi's words last time in the killing order. His expression was solemn. Have you searched? He knew about the clubhouse that Tang Hua was talking about. Previously, Old Six had said that he wanted to go and check it out. He knew that it wasn't going to be easy. He tried to stop Old Six, but he couldn't do so. I've tried, but there's no news yet. Jean Hauser's expression was solemn. He sat there with his brows tightly furrowed. The Jean family couldn't be dealt with in a day. After such a long time, he had slowly laid out his plans and slowly closed the net. Ever since he decided to go against the Jean family, he knew that this was a road full of thorns. No matter what, the Jean family was a family that had been accumulated for so many years. It was impossible to destroy them overnight. He had this understanding. However, this understanding did not include sacrificing the lives of those he regarded as his closest friends. Let Old Seven take some people to find out where Old Six is and bring him back. But, Tang Hua looked like he wanted to say something, but he hesitated. He didn't say what he didn't say, but Jean Hauser understood what he meant. If Old Seven brought people there and didn't manage to bring Old Six out, he might end up getting himself killed instead. If that was the case, then it really wasn't a good thing. Jean Hauser also realized that it was not appropriate to let seventh brother look for someone. Perhaps he should directly find a breakthrough point from the Jean family. His phone rang again. The person on the other end of the phone was Uncle Chi. I think we can meet now. I don't see any need to meet him. Jean Hauser had a very bad impression of Uncle Chi. Is that so? Uncle Chi smiled and said a name. Then he asked, Are you sure you don't want to see me? Jean Hauser's expression was ugly. He gripped the phone in his palm tightly and resisted the urge to throw it out. 2 hours later, Jean Hauser met Uncle Chi in the office of Qingqing Company. Uncle Chi's expression was much more smug than the last time he came. Jean Hauser was expressionless. Even if he was in a weak position, he wouldn't admit defeat in front of the Jean family. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry to speak. He slowly took out a few photos from his pocket and placed them on Jean Hauser's desk. In the photo, a man who looked to be less than 30 years old was tied to a chair. The man's body was obviously injured, as if he had been beaten. No matter how calm Jean Hauser was, his expression still changed slightly when he saw Old Six like this. But he quickly calmed down. He looked at Uncle Chi coldly. His slightly narrowed eyes were sinister and dangerous. Uncle Chi wasn't annoyed by his glare. He chuckled. How about we discuss a condition now? Jean Hauser frowned. His expression was very cold. I don't think there's anything to discuss between us. Why do you say that? I don't believe you don't know what the current situation is. Jean Hausa didn't answer him. Uncle Chi leaned forward slightly. I can guarantee that you won't be able to eat the Jean family in one go now. But if you're willing to take a step back, you can. Why don't you take a step back and we'll both be happy? If possible, Uncle Chi really didn't want to beg a junior like this. But he had no choice. Jean Yi, Jean Li, Jean Yang, and the others, ever since the last time, not only did they not unite as one, but they also caused more and more trouble. Jean Li's ability wasn't bad, but the Jean family had a big business. He hadn't taken on all the responsibilities in the past. There were many things that he couldn't make decisions about. He really didn't have Jean Kuen's demeanor back then. If it wasn't for the fact that Uncle Chi really couldn't find anyone, he wouldn't have put down his old face and come here to beg Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa curled up the corners of his lips. Take a step back? Oh. How about you take over the Jean family and let the Jean family become yours? Are you sure you can make the decision? Jean Kuen isn't dead yet. He really called Jean Kuen's name. His expression was full of ridicule without the slightest bit of respect. Uncle Chi wasn't angry. I don't believe that you don't know what kind of situation the old man is in now. So now I can make the decision. Uncle Chi had been by Jean Kuen's side for more than 30 years. In the Jean family he had absolute authority. He was also confident that as long as he was around, those people wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Jean Hausa was silent. He didn't respond to Uncle Chi's words. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry either. He was extremely patient today, waiting for Jean Hausa to compromise. Tang Hua, who was standing beside Jean Hausa, looked at his conflicted face. His lips moved, but he wanted to say something, but he stopped. As if sensing his subordinate's thoughts, Jean Hausa picked up the stack of photos and looked at the complacency and certainty on Uncle Chi's face. He tore off the photos one by one. I refuse. You, Uncle Chi, who hadn't expected such an answer, was stunned on the spot. He was stunned for nearly a minute. When Jean Hausa asked Tang Hua to chase him away, he suddenly placed his hands on the desk. Jean Hausa, are you sure? There's nothing to be uncertain about. Sixth brother's life wouldn't be in danger for the time being. Uncle Chi was afraid that he would use extreme measures, so he didn't dare to hurt sixth brother for the time being. And he was confident that he could bring sixth brother out. Don't you want Lu Tao's life anymore? Lu Tao was referring to sixth brother. He's just a subordinate, but if you dare to hurt him, I will repay the Jean family 10 times, 100 times. Jean Hausa wasn't afraid of Uncle Chi's threat. You can try. Really? Uncle Chi sneered and took out a few more photos from his pocket. Yes, you're amazing. You don't care about Lu Tao's life, so don't you care about her life? This time it was a photo of Shi Mengwan on the desk. One of them was a photo of Shi Mengwan alone, while the second photo was of Jean Hausa and Shi Mengwan dancing on the dance floor together in France. Jean Hausa's gaze became sinister and dangerous. He almost couldn't help but stand up, but he quickly sat down again. If you dare to touch a single strand of her hair, do you believe that I will let you have a taste of what it's like to beg for death? Don't get agitated. Uncle Chi didn't care about his threat at all. If you're so agitated, we won't be able to calm down later, don't you think? Jean Hausa knew that he had lost control just now. He should have acted a little calmer. This kind of weakness being grasped in the hands of others made him feel very unhappy. What exactly do you want to do? Uncle Chi smiled. Stop all your revenge, go back to the Jean family and support the overall situation. Jean Hausa's expression was rather ugly. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry. He had been by Jean Kuen's side for 30 years and had walked step by step to where he was now in the Jean family. He wasn't someone to be trifled with. What if I refuse? I think you don't have a choice. Uncle Chi didn't mind telling the truth. Yes, you can also refuse, but I can't guarantee the lives of Mr. Liu and Miss Shi. Looking at Jean Hausa's gloomy face, Uncle Chi chuckled. Of course, you can also tie me up now and use me, an old fellow, to exchange hostages with the Jean family. However, I'm already so old. If I really die, I won't have any regrets. If the two of them really die with me, it'll be worth it. Don't you think so? Jean Hausa stared at Uncle Chi's face. He didn't restrain his aura at all. That pressure made even an experienced person like Uncle Chi tremble slightly. However, the more Jean Hausa acted like this, the more determined Uncle Chi was to let him return to the Jean family. Only such a person could support the Jean family. The atmosphere in the office was rather silent. Jean Hausa sat there without moving. Tang Hua, who was behind him, listened to him completely. Naturally, he wouldn't disturb him at such a time. He didn't speak and Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry. He didn't expect Jean Hausa to agree immediately, but he was gambling. After all, he was the child of Jean Lai and Xiao Ruoliu. Jean Hausa was like Jean Kuan but not like him. His methods were similar, but he was afraid that there was still a soft spot in his heart. And this soft spot was enough for Uncle Chi to make use of. 10 minutes later, Jean Hausa finally said, "Okay, I agree. But I have a few conditions." "Speak." "First, this old man is old. Since his health isn't good, don't come out all the time. Rest well." This was to separate Jean Kuan. Uncle Chi was a little hesitant, but in the end he nodded. Anyway, he was Jean Kuan's spokesperson now. He would do what Jean Kuan instructed. As long as he kept an eye on it, no one would cause trouble in front of Jean Kuan. Okay. Second, I'll take over the Jean family. I don't want to see the other Jean family members. This is a little difficult. After all, they all have their own duties now. For the time being, they won't hinder you. If you don't agree, there's nothing to talk about. I'm that person's grandson. If you provoke me, at most we'll fight to the death. Okay. I agree. In any case, it wasn't much use for those idiots to stay in the Jean family. It didn't matter if they stayed or not. Third, let my people go. Also, you have to promise that you'll never touch my people. You're not allowed to hurt them. No problem. Since you're willing to take over the Jean family, you're my master. Not only will I get people to revoke the kill order against you, but I can also get people to protect the people you care about. Protect? What did this protection mean? Jean Hausa couldn't be clearer. He looked at Uncle Chi coldly. Give me a week. I'll arrange things and enter the company. Okay. I'll wait for you for a week. Uncle Chi, who had received an affirmative answer, was very easy to talk to. If you think a week isn't enough, more time is fine. Uncle Chi left. Jean Hausa sat on the chair and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Tang Hua asked worriedly, "Boss?" Jean Hausa didn't look at him. He half closed his eyes and said softly, "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Shi Mingwan's life returned to peace. After that day, Jean Hausa never came to look for her again. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. Su Qingsang's stomach was already big. She wanted to fly to Rong City to see her a few times, but she had too many things to do. The studio recruited 2 newcomers and slowly got the hang of it. However, many clothes were requested to be mass-produced on Weibo. Of course, it wouldn't be lacking in anything. But it was still lacking a little something. If she wanted to make it big, she had to mass-produce it. Shi Mingwan understood this logic. In the following time, she went to a few factories and a few raw material manufacturers. She was so busy that she had no time to care about her own matters. Mother Shi had probably guessed something. Ever since the last blind date was ruined, she didn't mention asking her to go on a blind date again. This way, Shi Mingwan was much quieter. That day she went to the last factory. It was already very late when she returned to the city. Although this section of the road had been repaired, there weren't many cars. Shi Mingwan drove halfway. She didn't know if it was because of stones or something else, but the car jolted. Shi Mingwan quickly reacted and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Finally, after stabilizing the car, she was about to continue driving. However, she realized that the car seemed to have broken down or something. It actually didn't move. She tried to start the car a few times but couldn't. After that, she quickly got out of the car to see what was wrong. If it didn't work, she could only call for a tow truck. Shi Mingwan got out of the car and opened the front cover. She didn't know much about the problem with the car. She only did this to see how to solve it. It was already late. She was alone in this place where there was no village or shop. Just thinking about it made her a little scared. She propped up the front cover of the car and checked it with the light of her phone. With her level, she couldn't find anything wrong with her car. After checking for a long time, Shi Mingwan really couldn't tell. Just as she was about to call for a tow truck, a voice came from behind her. "Miss, the car is broken. Do you want me to take a look at it for you?" Shi Mingwan was startled by the sudden sound. She turned around and saw a few young men in their early 20s surrounding her at some point in time. The one who spoke was a man in the lead. He was wearing a black jacket. He also seemed to think that he was handsome and shook his head. "Miss, come, let us examine you." Shi Mingwan swallowed her saliva. The situation in front of her didn't seem to be very good. "No need, I've already called for a tow truck." She held her phone and wanted to call the police without leaving a trace. However, the man in the lead took her phone away at this moment. "Miss, don't be so ungrateful. No matter what, we brothers have good intentions." As he spoke, he waved his hand behind him. "Come you guys, give this beautiful lady a good examination." Under the night sky, Shi Mingwan's face was pale. She forced herself to calm down and reached out her hand to the man. "Give me back my phone. I don't need you to examine me." "Miss, maybe you'll need it later?" The man in the black jacket smiled evilly. The few people he brought with him had already approached Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan was really scared this time. She was only one person, but the other party had 6. She pressed her body tightly against the front cover of the car, still thinking about how to escape. Suddenly, the sound of a car came from behind her. She turned her face, and the lights from the car shone on her face, causing her to narrow her eyes for a moment. The men in the black jacket weren't in a hurry to move. They thought that they would continue after the other party left. Unexpectedly, the car stopped beside them. It was also at this moment that the man in the black jacket saw it clearly. The other party wasn't a car. It was 5 cars. There were 2 Bentleys in front and 2 Bentleys in the back. The one in the middle was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Even people without common sense were stunned when they saw this row of luxury cars. Not to mention hooligans like the yellow-haired man. Shi Mengwan also saw it clearly now. She saw many tall men in black suits getting out of the cars in front and behind her. Someone opened the back door of the Rolls-Royce, and a pair of extremely slender and powerful legs came out first. In the light of the car lights, the owner of the legs walked towards Shi Mengwan step by step. Shi Mengwan swallowed her saliva. Before she could react, the owner of the legs had already walked in front of her. The few young men were so scared that they didn't dare to speak. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mengwan and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mengwan didn't know what to think of, but she actually dodged and pulled her hand back. Not only that, she even took a step to the side. She forgot that there was someone beside her. As she stood there, she bumped into a hooligan standing beside her. This time, Shi Mengwan didn't have time to dodge. Her body moved to the side, but she lost her balance and fell to the side. Zhang Haoze's hand caught her waist in time. In the next second, she was carried horizontally. Pressing her head into his chest, Zhang Haoze gave the leader of the men in black a look. The man understood. The man in the black jacket realized that something was wrong, but it was too late to escape. Soon, waves of wailing and fighting sounds came from behind Zhang Haoze and the others. Shi Mengwan wanted to poke her head out to take a look, but she was already carried into the car by Zhang Haoze. Shi Mengwan and Zhang Haoze hadn't seen each other for almost 2 months. Sitting in the car, she didn't have time to look outside. She just looked at Zhang Haoze and sensitively realized that Zhang Haoze in front of her seemed to be different. Chapter 696. The car was very spacious and very quiet. Shi Mengwan took some time to recover from the frightening moment just now. Just now, she almost thought that she was going to. Retracting her thoughts, she looked at Zhang Haoze in front of her with complicated emotions. From when she was a young girl until now, every time she was in danger, he was the one who saved her. She couldn't say what she felt in her heart, but at this moment, her mood was very subtle. She couldn't think about anything else, so she just stared blankly at Zhang Haoze. Only then did she realize that the person in front of her seemed to be different. After not seeing him for nearly 2 months, Zhang Haoze's brows were still the same, but the expression revealed inside was very different. In the past, he was a little dark and arrogant. Looking at him now, his dark and arrogant demeanor was still there. But there was something else. The moment he got out of the car just now, his eyes were cold and his gaze was like a knife. It gave people the feeling that he was a sword that had finally been sharpened. This kind of superior aura made Shi Mengwan subconsciously swallow her saliva. The car was still parked. Shi Mengwan turned around and saw that the man in black who was in the lead outside the car window had already been beaten to the ground. The scene was a little bloody. Shi Mengwan turned around to look at Zhang Haoze. Is that enough? If they continued to fight, someone would probably die. Zhang Haoze glanced at her and didn't answer. She came out to talk about the factory today. She was wearing a casual suit and her long hair was tied into a ponytail. She looked much more beautiful and youthful. He picked up the ponytail behind her head and leaned over to sniff it gently. This action didn't contain much of an erotic feeling, but Shi Mengwan felt an inexplicable ambiguity, which made her very uncomfortable. It's really enough. She forced herself to focus on something else. Tell them to stop. Zhang Haoze still had her hair in his hand. He moved his face closer. Do you know what they wanted to do just now? Shi Mengwan's breathing tightened. Of course she knew. Just call the police. Zhang Haoze stared at her face for a long time and knocked on the car window. The people outside almost instantly stopped kicking and hitting. The group of people stood beside the car in front and back. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but turn around to look at Zhang Haoze. This person had caused such a big scene. He was probably different now, wasn't he? She didn't have the chance to ask the question in her heart. Those people had already gotten into the car and the car started up again. She couldn't help but turn to look at him. The person in front of her still had the same face, but she felt a little unfamiliar. Jean Hauser watched as her mind wandered. His lips moved forward and he was about to kiss her lips. Shi Mingwan subconsciously avoided it. Such an action made Jean Hauser's eyes darken. He put his arm around her waist and grabbed her, not letting her leave. He lowered his head and kissed her without warning. Shi Mingwan didn't have time to escape. This time Jean Hauser kissed her. The lights in the carriage were dim. Occasionally there was the reflection of the street lamp. His deep facial features could not be seen clearly at this moment. Oh. Shi Mingwan felt pain on her lips. He bit her. She stared at him. He stepped back but his hand was still on her waist. The distance between the two faces was less than 3 centimeters. The atmosphere in front of him was too intimate. Shi Mingwan wasn't used to it. At this moment he was at a loss for words. My car. It wasn't just the car. There was also her bag in the car. Don't worry, they will take care of it. His breath brushed against her face. Shi Mingwan was about to step back, but for some reason she closed her eyes. This way it seemed like she was inviting Jean Hauser to kiss her. Jean Hauser did as she wished and kissed her once again. Shi Mingwan looked at the 5 cars parked in front of her apartment and felt a headache coming on. She didn't understand why things had become like this again. She looked at Jean Hauser speechlessly. Can you not be so ostentatious? She still had to live in this neighborhood in the future. If others saw Jean Hauser's actions, what would they think? Jean Hauser shook his head. The current situation was special. Although he made a deal with Uncle Chi and took over the Jean family. But the Jean family wasn't peaceful either. The current Jean family was like a volcano under a calm surface that could erupt at any time. Whether it was Jean Yi, Jean Li, or Jean Yang, none of them were convinced of him. In the past month or so they had been playing tricks behind his back. Jean Hauser didn't take them seriously, but he wouldn't relax with the necessary defensive measures. Why are you still looking for me? Shi Mingwan was angry. I remember that we broke up. I also remember that I didn't agree. He wanted to get out of the car, but Shi Mingwan sat there and refused to get out. Jean Hauser. Shi Mingwan felt tired every time she communicated with him. What do you take me for? What do you take me for? You appear whenever you want and disappear whenever you want. When you disappeared there was no news at all. When you appeared, you insisted on me cooperating with your performance. What kind of logic is this? Her face was expressionless. The emotions that had arisen when she saw him had all turned into calmness. Jean Hauser looked at her and suddenly reached out to hug her. I'm sorry. Shi Mingwan's body stiffened, but Jean Hauser acted as if he didn't feel it. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have disappeared and appeared whenever I wanted. But if you're unhappy, I can promise you that I won't do this in the future. Shi Mingwan didn't know how to react to this sudden apology. But she quickly remembered that this was the second time Jean Hauser had apologized. Last time he also said he was sorry, but what happened in the end? It wasn't that Shi Mingwan didn't love him, but she didn't want to believe him anymore. The price of believing him was too high. She realized that she couldn't afford it. Jean Hauser. She should be happy that such a person made such a promise at such a time, but she really couldn't be happy. Do you know? She looked at her fingertips and lowered her eyes. Her expression couldn't be seen clearly. I don't dare to believe your promise anymore. You might not know, but I'm very tired when I'm with you. I often wonder if I did something wrong. I often wonder what you're doing in places that I don't know about. Will those things be dangerous? Jean Hauser. Shi Mingwan finally looked up at him and met his eyes. It's too tiring to be with you. I don't want to be tired anymore. As she spoke, she pushed open the car door and got out. She turned around and went into the apartment. Jean Hauser got out of the car and waved his hand. Although the leader didn't agree, the 5 cars drove away together. Jean Hauser slowed down and followed behind Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan quickened her pace, and Jean Hauser followed behind her. When they reached the elevator, she wanted to tell him to stop following her, but this wasn't her home, so she endured it. Jean Hauser didn't seem to notice the disgust in her eyes at all and just followed behind her. They entered the elevator and went upstairs. Shi Mingwan was silent all the way, so he followed her all the way. It wasn't until they stood at the door that Shi Mingwan finally couldn't help but turn around and glare at him. Mr. Jean, don't you have anywhere to go? Shi Mingwan's tone wasn't very good. I believe that with your current status, you should have your own place in Lin City, right? Even if you don't, I believe that Miss Chen would be happy to take you in, So I really don't understand why you keep following me. Jean Hausa looked at the anger on her face. This was her, right? She was lively and full of life. There was an almost imperceptible smile in his eyes. He leaned forward and placed one hand on the door behind her. I do have a place to stay. His face was almost pressed against her face and his voice was low and seductive. But I just want to be by your side. This person's words of love were really deadly. Shi Mingwan's body was already tightly pressed against the door behind her. A man's lust would lead people astray. This was really true. The Jean Hausa in front of her could be considered a male version of Daji to her. Shi Mingwan never thought that she would hear Jean Hausa confess like this one day. Looking at his face, she was a little confused. You? Before she could finish the word you, the door behind her opened with a ka. Shi Mingwan was stunned when she almost fell back. She had just steadied herself when she remembered that her bag was still in the car, so she didn't bring the key. Then, she lowered her head and saw Jean Hausa open the door with the key. Her lips opened and closed again. You? Didn't she ask him to return the key to her? Why did he still have it? When Jean Hausa opened the door, he used his other hand to hold her waist. He brought her in and closed the door. Jean Hausa. Shi Mingwan reached out her hand. Return the key. 1-1. Jean Hausa picked her up and held her body firmly in his arms. I miss you so much. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Don't you miss me? Who wants to miss you? Shi Mingwan went to pull his hand. Jean Hausa restrained her hand behind her back. Don't you miss me? I don't want to. Jean Hausa kissed her on the lips. Do you want to? Who would miss you? Get out of the way. Jean Hausa remembered again. Do you want to? I said, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to. Jean Hausa stopped fooling around. I really don't miss you. Her voice rose a notch and her face was flushed with anger. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes slightly and suddenly carried her horizontally. Since you say you don't want to, then it proves that I've done too little before. It looks like I have to do something to make you remember it often. Jean Hausa, you're shameless. Jean Hausa wasn't angry when he heard this. Instead, he leaned his face close to her ear. Yes, I'll do something even more shameless later. Do you believe me? In terms of being a hooligan, how could Shi Mingwan be his match? Her body was placed on the bed. When she tried to get up, he piled on top of her and pressed her down. If she pushed him, he would have the ability to make her unable to move. The moment her hand was tied by his tie, Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth. You're raping me. Is that so? Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes. Since you said that, I can only think of a way to make you willingly be raped by me. Shi Mingwan didn't understand what Jean Hausa meant. However, when she was teased by him like a kitten and begged for mercy time and time again, she realized that this was really more shameful than being willing to do it. When Shi Mingwan was half awake and half dreaming, she felt herself being gently carried into the bathroom by Jean Hausa. There was no bathtub, so she was carried by him the entire time. After he was done, he carefully dried her dry and carried her out again. He gently placed her on the bed. He took the hairdryer to dry her hair, then pulled up the blanket to cover her body. Shi Mingwan was about to fall asleep, so her body was very tired and sore. So much so that when she saw Jean Hausa like this, not only did she not feel touched, but she felt angry instead. Bastard. She was angry. Jean Hausa, can you not be like a stallion in heat every time? Jean Hausa frowned because of her description. As if he had thought of something, he wrapped her hand in his arms. Sorry, I can't help it. He gently kissed her earlobe and felt her trembling slightly because of his action. He silently curled his lips and his eyes were filled with joy. My self-control is very poor after meeting you. It was clearly his problem, so why was he blaming her now? Shi Mingwan didn't want to talk to him and she was very sleepy. She pretended not to hear what Jean Hausa said. She closed her eyes and wanted to sleep, but Jean Hausa didn't allow it. He kissed her on the cheek again. Wan, come with me to Qing City. Shi Mingwan didn't even bother to answer. She didn't want to talk to him at all. I want you to stay by my side. Most importantly, other than those restless cousins, there was also Uncle Chi. He didn't trust anyone. He had to keep her under his nose. Only when he personally watched her and protected her would he be at ease. No. Shi Mingwan refused and turned her back to him. Jean Hausa, I'm not going anywhere. She used her posture to show her resistance. Jean Hausa looked at the back of her head and hooked her into his arms with his big hand. He lowered his head and gently kissed the top of her head. Sleep. If there was anything he would talk about it after she woke up. Yesterday Shi Mingwan would rather believe that she was dreaming. In her dream Zhang Haoze saved her, and in her dream, Zhang Haoze followed her home. Then the two of them messed around again. She shook her head. This kind of dream wasn't good. It was a nightmare for her. But she didn't expect that when she opened her eyes, Zhang Haoze was still there. Just like before, the dining table was filled with breakfast. Zhang Haoze sat at the dining table. When he saw her get up, he reached out his hand to her. Eat. After yesterday, Shi Mingwan didn't want to argue with Zhang Haoze over such a small matter. If there was anything, she could wait until she finished her breakfast, and then she could slowly talk to him. I'm going out later. After breakfast, without waiting for Shi Mingwan to lay her cards on the table, Zhang Haoze took the initiative to explain his whereabouts. There are some things at the company that I need to deal with. I'll probably be in Lin City for the next few days. You can also pack your luggage and come with me to Qing City when you're ready. When Shi Mingwan heard this, she put down the milk in her hand. Zhang Haoze, I don't think I promised you that I would go to Qing City, right? Wanwan stopped fooling around. Zhang Haoze wanted to hold her hand, but Shi Mingwan didn't give him the chance. She stood up. Zhang Haoze, didn't you come all the way here just to do what happened last night? You've done it now and your goal has been achieved. You can leave now. Wanwan. As for me, I'll never go to Qing City. Give up on that thought. After saying this, she turned around and went back to her room to change her clothes and prepare for work. After taking a few steps, she could feel a certain feeling coming from a certain part of her body. She gritted her teeth and turned around to glare at Zhang Haoze. Would she accompany such a person to Qing City? She wouldn't serve him anymore. He would go wherever he wanted to go. Zhang Haoze sat there without moving. Looking at her figure, the corners of his lips curled up even higher. Zhang Haoze looked at Qin Yongchang in front of him expressionlessly. Qin Yongchang, who was used to liking him in front of him, was completely silent at this moment. There was a hint of flattery in the silence. After a long silence, it was Qin Yongchang who spoke first. Haoze, you haven't been paying much attention to the company these few months. Zhang Haoze was silent. He wanted to send Shi Mingwan to the studio in the morning, but he didn't expect to receive a call from Qin Yongchang. He didn't know how he found out about his return to Lin City, so he came looking for him early in the morning. Zhang Haoze didn't intend to be too ruthless towards Qin Yongchang. However, this didn't mean that he was a soft persimmon that could be bullied by anyone. Don't you have uncle to deal with the company's matters? I thought you wouldn't want to see me interfere too much. Look at what you're saying. No matter what, you and Fei Fei are childhood sweethearts and engaged fiancés. Isn't it normal for you to interfere in the Qin family's business? Uncle, it's better to be careful with your words. I remember that I've already made it clear to Fei Fei that we've already broken off the engagement. Uncle, if you continue to say that, it will affect Fei Fei's reputation outside. Qin Yongchang looked at Zhang Haoze. Even he couldn't help but want to curse. If you really knew that it would affect Fei Fei's reputation, you shouldn't have cancelled the engagement. Haoze, look at what you're saying. Fei Fei is sincere to you. You can't let her down like this, can you? Qin Yongchang endured his unhappiness and once again played the emotional card. He said how they saved Zhang Haoze back then. If it weren't for them, Zhang Haoze would have died on the streets by now. If Zhang Haoze was a person with a conscience, he wouldn't have declined and taken over the Qin Corporation's business. In the past 2 months, Qin Yongchang really felt uncomfortable. When Zhang Haoze was in Lin City, he didn't do anything. However, the company's performance had been thriving. Many cases that seemed difficult to solve at that time became easy in Zhang Haoze's hands. Ever since he wasn't around for the past 2 months, although the Qin Corporation didn't have any major problems, Qin Yongchang found it more and more difficult. He also understood more and more about Zhang Haoze's role and methods. Zhang Haoze sat still and patiently waited for Qin Yongchang to finish talking about the past. He supported his chin with one hand. Then, Uncle Qin, what do you want me to do? He didn't call him uncle anymore. Instead, he added his surname. The alienation was already very obvious. Qin Yongchang didn't hear it. Look at what you're saying. Of course, you're going to re-enter the Qin Corporation and take over your original business. Zhang Haoze wasn't in a hurry to speak. He just looked at Qin Yongchang and stared straight at his face. He couldn't take it anymore. What did he mean? He finally spoke. Go to the Qin Corporation and take over the Qin Corporation's business. Then, wait for me to make the Qin Corporation bigger and stronger, and then let the real ideal person in your heart take over your business, right? Haoze, what nonsense are you talking about? Is it nonsense? Jean Hausa didn't think so. He stared at Qin Yongchang's face, took out a photo from the drawer, and pushed the photo in front of Qin Yongchang. Seeing the photo, Qin Yongchang's eyes widened. Where did you get this photo? No, how did you know? He did this very secretly and no one knew about it. Other than a trusted aide who had followed him for many years and took care of him from time to time, no one else knew about this matter, let alone others. Jean Hausa looked at Qin Yongchang with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Uncle probably doesn't know, but I don't like to fight battles that I'm not confident in. Since you want me to return to the Qin Corporation, support the Qin Corporation again, and bring it to glory, then I have to make sure what benefits I can get from this place. Right? If there's no benefit, why waste my time? But I didn't expect that the matter that Uncle arranged for me not only didn't have any benefits, but also dug such a big pit for me to jump into. He didn't say anything else. Qin Yongchang became anxious. Jean Hausa, what do you mean? You, Uncle. Jean Hausa picked up the photo with an appreciative look in his eyes. When he put it down, his gaze became quite sharp. Making wedding dresses for others is not a good thing. Maybe there are saints who like it, but I don't. Hausa, not to mention, I've already told Feifei that we're going to cancel the wedding. Feifei is a very smart girl. She just didn't understand it for a while. After a long time, she will know that her feelings are just the infatuation of a little girl who doesn't understand love. But Uncle, you're different. Jean Hausa's voice was filled with mockery, and every word seemed to hit Qin Yongchang's heart. Uncle, you've doted on Feifei for so many years. You made Feifei think that she was the happiest little princess in the world. But I think she probably never dreamed that she, the Qin family's proudest little princess, wasn't the only one. Because her father, who has always doted on her, had an illegitimate child outside. Jean Hausa. Qin Yongchang couldn't take it anymore. That's enough. Shut up. Don't say any more. Feifei's health isn't good. You don't want her to be agitated. However, you don't want these assets to fall into the hands of others, so you came to me. Because with me, who owes the Qin family a favor, you can ignore me and treat me as a sacrifice. You can use me to make money for you. You can use me to bring the Qin family to the top again. And you, once the Qin family reaches the height you want again, you will think of him as a gift to that bastard of yours who is out there. And poor Feifei, she was sacrificed by you just like that. Jean Hausa's words were very soft. Qin Yongchang's expression was ugly. He wanted to slap the table and scold Jean Hausa for talking nonsense. But at this moment the office door was opened with a bang. Chapter 697. Qin Feifei's face was pale, and there was sweat on her forehead. She had always been in poor health. At this time she had one hand on the wall and the other on her heart. She gasped, looking at the two people in front of her, wishing for a moment that she could faint. But her body, which had always been weak, showed no signs of fainting. She looked at Qin Yongchang and then at Jean Hausa. His gaze was filled with accusation and accusation. You guys, Feifei? Qin Yongchang's expression changed. But only for a while. There were some things that his daughter would find out sooner or later. Dad. Qin Nan panted and walked step by step towards the two people sitting. Is what Brother Hao said true? Even though Qin Yongchang was used to seeing great storms, he still felt a little guilty when he met his daughter's eyes. He didn't say anything. Qin Feifei turned to Jean Hausa for an answer. Brother Hao, you wouldn't lie to me, would you? Tell me, is what you just said true? Her face was full of disbelief, but there was still the photo on Jean Hausa's desk. Qin Feifei snatched it over and looked at the person in the photo. Needless to say, there was no need to ask any more. He was a very young man who looked like he was still in university. He looked 50% similar to Qin Yongchang. It was just that he was younger and more flamboyant. Qin Feifei felt an unbearable pain in her heart. She thought she would faint again, but she didn't. She put her hands on the desk and stood firm. She stared at Jean Hausa's face and stubbornly asked for an answer. Jean Hausa's gaze fell on the photo in her hand. He looked up at Qin Feifei. This person wasn't Shi Mengwan. She was weak and sensitive. She could not bear the impending unveiling of the true would I. Haven't you already seen the photos? Without saying anything more, Qin Feifei staggered and almost fell. She looked at Qin Yongchang again. She suddenly threw the photo away and grabbed Qin Yongchang's shoulder. Dad, why are you doing this? Didn't you say so? You said I was your little princess. You said I was your only daughter. Didn't you say so? You said that everything in the Qin family will be mine in the future. What? She asked several questions in a row, insisting on an answer. Qin Yongchang was shaken by her, but he didn't look at her. After Qin Feifei finished shaking, she started to hit Qin Yongchang. How can you do this? How could you do this? Didn't you say that you loved my mother the most? Didn't you say that you would never marry again after she left? Then who was he? Why does he still exist? Dad, how can you face my mom like this? How could you let me down? Dad, how could you do this? Qin Feifei's health was not very good. She did not have much strength at all. As he fought and cried, he went limp. This time she really fainted. Qin Yongchang's expression finally changed. He quickly picked up Qin Feifei. He just didn't know if it was because he was anxious or something else. When he got up, he loosened his grip and almost dropped Qin Feifei. Zhang Haoze had been watching coldly from the sidelines. Seeing this, he finally made a move. He stepped forward, picked up Qin Feifei and walked out. Qin Yongchang followed behind him. His voice was sharp and cold. Zhang Haoze, you're too ruthless. You called Feifei here, right? You did it on purpose, didn't you? Zhang Haoze did not answer his question, but he did not deny it either. Qin Yongchang was furious. All right. You're ruthless. That was a beautiful move of yours. Uncle, don't be angry. Zhang Haoze carried Qin Feifei into the elevator. Looking at Qin Yongchang, who was flustered and exasperated, the corners of his lips curled up into a cold smile. According to your plan, it's only a matter of time. You had this plan for a long time. I was just helping you advance it. You? Qin Yongchang was speechless. Of course he did not want to reveal it now. At the very least, he had to wait until they got married. At that time, Zhang Haoze would not ignore Qin Feifei. Don't think that you can get away with it. Let me tell you, Feifei is your responsibility. Zhang Haoze did not say anything. He carried Qin Feifei downstairs. The car was already waiting downstairs just like before. Qin Yongchang looked at the group of people and swallowed the words he wanted to curse. In the end, he got into the car with a toothache. After the rescue, Qin Feifei finally woke up. After she woke up, she didn't want to see Qin Yongchang. She chased Qin Yongchang out, but let Zhang Haoze stay alone. The ward was very quiet. Qin Feifei had already smelled enough of the disinfectant since she was young. She was also tired of smelling it. But because her body was not healthy enough, she had to do it from time to time. She stared out of the window in a daze for a full 10 minutes. She didn't speak and Zhang Haoze didn't speak either. The game had already begun. The engagement had to be broken. In fact, the existence of this engagement was not approved by him. Since it was a mistake, of course he had to correct it. He had patience now. Qin Feifei looked at the setting sun outside. She finally retracted her gaze and faced Zhang Haoze. When did you know? Zhang Haoze didn't expect her to ask this. He didn't intend to lie to her. A long time ago. How long ago is a long time ago? When you were 18. At that time, Qin Yongchang had already started to let him enter the company and take over some matters. He knew that Qin Yongchang wanted to groom him as a son-in-law. But later he subtly discovered some differences. Especially after the Qin Corporation went through that danger, it was clearly caused by Qin Yongchang's distrust of him. Although he turned the tide later and reduced the losses, he also successfully let the Qin Corporation fight a beautiful turnaround. But the seed of doubt was planted in his heart. If Qin Yongchang really wanted him to treat Qin Feifei well, or marry Qin Feifei in the future, and take care of the Qin Corporation well, he shouldn't have such an attitude. Although he wanted to solve the Zhan family's matter at that time, he wasn't completely unprepared. After investigating for a while, he found out the reason from many clues. After knowing it, it was much simpler. On the surface, Qin Yongchang was indeed a good father and husband. But deep down he had some traditions. He wanted his son to inherit the family business. His kindness to Qin Feifei was real. But his kindness came with conditions. And all of this was seen through by Zhang Haoze. So early? Qin Feifei's eyes widened. After understanding the key point, she didn't care about how Zhang Haoze found out. There was only one thought in her mind. Brother Hao, you really don't like me, do you? If he liked her a little, he wouldn't treat her like this. Zhang Haoze was silent. He thought for a moment and told the truth. In my heart, you're my sister. Sister? Qin Feifei smiled bitterly, her eyes full of mockery. Yes, I'm your sister, so you don't have to feel sorry for me. You don't have to pity me. You asked me to your company and let me hear such a cruel truth. Brother Hao, you're so cruel. Zhang Haoze didn't deny it. Qin Feifei took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Why did you do this? Just to break off the engagement with me? Yes. He knew Shi Mengwan's heart not. If he wanted Qin Feifei to publicly break off the engagement in front of everyone in Lin City, he had to make Qin Feifei stand up. The current situation was that Shi Mingwan didn't believe his words. But if Qin Feifei stood up, Shi Mingwan would believe it. Qin Feifei's lips were pursed into a straight line. Her pale face and red eyes would make any man feel pity for her. "Brother Hao, do you have a woman you like?" Zhang Haoze pursed his lips slightly and didn't deny it. Qin Feifei smiled. She seemed to have grown up in an instant and suddenly understood many things. "You have someone you like, so you don't like me. The person you like might have misunderstood our relationship, so you want me to explain, right?" She looked at Zhang Haoze and knew that her guess was true. She smiled bitterly with a bitter expression. "A girl who can make you care about her like this must be very beautiful, right?" "Yes." Zhang Haoze nodded. "In my heart she's the most beautiful." The generous praise made Qin Feifei's face turn even paler. She bit her lip and her fingertips trembled. "What do you want me to do?" "You'll announce the news of our breaking off the engagement. You can find any reason. I don't mind." In other words, Qin Feifei could be the reasonable one. She could make up any reason. She looked up at Zhang Haoze. "Aren't you afraid that if I say you're bad, the girl you like won't like you?" "No." Zhang Haoze's voice was very soft. He thought of Shi Mingwan. "No matter what I am, she will like me." Qin Feifei clenched her fists tightly to control herself from crying. Zhang Haoze's gentle tone when he talked about that woman was something he had never used on her before. "What if I don't agree?" "You will agree." Zhang Haoze looked at her fixedly. "Because you're a smart girl." Qin Feifei smiled. "Brother Hao, do you know? This is the first time you've praised me. But I'm not happy at all." Zhang Haoze was still silent. He did have sibling feelings for Qin Feifei. There was also gratitude. But that was all. "Brother Hao, I will agree to you. But I also hope that you can agree to two conditions." Qin Feifei's expression seemed to have changed. She was much calmer than before. "Don't worry, just two. And I won't make things difficult for you. Go ahead." Qin Feifei stared at her fingernails. In the shortest time possible, many thoughts had already flashed through her mind. Everything that happened today was a huge blow to her. If possible, she really hoped that she was still the happy little princess of the Chen family. But now, she knew that she couldn't be that carefree little princess anymore. "First, I can't agree to break off the engagement with you immediately. Give me some time." Zhang Haoze frowned. Qin Feifei looked at him. "Brother Hao, if I stand up right now and say that I'll break off the engagement with you, it will be very bad for the company. I need to use your name." 3 months. 3 months was the limit of his patience. Qin Feifei looked at him deeply and finally nodded. "Okay, 3 months. The second thing is that I haven't completely mastered the company yet. I also know that I won't be able to master it very quickly in a short period of time. I hope that you can help me, Brother Hao. It doesn't matter if it's you or if you find someone. I don't want the company to fall into the hands of unrelated people." When Qin Feifei said that she didn't want to do it, a flash of gloominess flashed across her face. It was true that the Qin Corporation belonged to Qin Yongchang, but without her mother's power and help, Qin Yongchang wouldn't have been able to develop the company to its current state. The company belonged to Qin Yongchang, and it was also her mother's. She didn't want outsiders to get involved in any way. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. "Brother Hao, I know you can do it, right?" Zhang Haoze looked at Qin Feifei. No matter what, they had grown up together. The change in Qin Feifei in front of him was unexpected, but it seemed to be reasonable. After all, after such a major change, it would really be abnormal if the person in front of him was still the same as before. "I can." "Thank you, Brother Hao." Qin Feifei smiled at him gratefully. "There's one more thing." Qin Feifei seemed to realize that she had more than 3 conditions. Her expression was a little awkward, but Zhang Haoze didn't mind. "Go ahead." Qin Feifei bit her lip. Her expression was conflicted, painful, hesitant, but in the end it was firm. "My father, he's getting old. I think he needs a good rest. Tell me, as his daughter, if I send him to a place with a good environment to spend the rest of his life, others won't be able to accuse me of being unfilial, right?" When Zhang Haoze heard this, the corners of his lips curled up slightly. Look, this was Qin Feifei. No matter how weak she looked on the outside, she was actually a person with a clear goal inside. He was not surprised or shocked that she had such a thought. "Of course." Zhang Haoze nodded. "Feifei, you're so attentive. Others will only say that you're a good daughter and a very filial daughter." Qin Feifei seemed to heave a sigh of relief. "Yes, I'm a good daughter." There was a hint of bitterness in her words as well as something else. Zhang Haoze didn't care anymore. He stood up. It was getting late and he still wanted to go back and have dinner with Shi Mingwan. You decide the location. After you decide, I'll be responsible for sending uncle to recuperate. Qin Feifei nodded. The moment Zhang Haoze turned around, she called out to him again. Brother Hao. Zhang Haoze turned around. Qin Feifei gritted her teeth as if she was going all out. Since my father is going to retire, someone has to take care of him. Someone has to take care of him, and my cheap little brother should be the most suitable candidate. Right? She blinked her big eyes and looked at Zhang Haoze. At this moment she didn't pretend at all. Zhang Haoze smiled. This was a rare smile that he showed in front of Qin Feifei. Of course. No one is more suitable than him. Qin Feifei seemed to be relieved. She looked up at Zhang Haoze and reached out her hand to him. Brother Hao, can you hug me? Just treat it as your final farewell. Zhang Haoze looked at her and gently put his arm around her shoulder. Just as he was about to step back, Qin Feifei suddenly tightened her arms. He felt her trembling. She buried her face in his chest. Brother Hao, I'm really jealous of her. After saying this, she let go of her hand and turned her face away. Brother Hao, you should go quickly. Otherwise I'll regret it. Zhang Haoze looked at Qin Feifei. He had watched her grow up. Feifei, take care of yourself in the future. I believe that the Qin family will definitely flourish in your hands. Of course. Qin Feifei didn't turn her head, but her eyes were much more determined than when she first woke up. In the past she only wanted to be in love, but now she knew. What love? It's all fake. If even someone close to you could betray you, what else was real? Only the benefits that were in his hands were real. Zhang Haoze left the ward. As soon as he left, Qin Yongchang came over. What did Feifei say to you? How is she? Qin Yongchang looked in the direction of the ward. He wanted to get closer just now, but he was stopped by Zhang Haoze's bodyguard. Zhang Haoze glanced at Qin Yongchang. Thinking of Qin Feifei's request just now, he felt a little sympathy for Qin Yongchang. In some ways, Qin Feifei was the same kind of person as him. This was also the reason why he could never fall in love with Qin Feifei. Even though he had been with Qin Feifei for more than 10 years. Uncle Qin, go and see Feifei. As for what I said to her, let her tell you herself. Zhang Haoze wasn't in the mood to stay any longer. This time, when he returned to Lin City, the matter in front of him was his first priority. Now that it was resolved, his footsteps were a little lighter. After getting into the car, the driver didn't need to ask. He drove directly to Shi Mengwan's apartment. When he entered, he smelled the aroma of food in the room. That familiar smell and familiar environment made Zhang Haoze's expression relax for an instant. He changed his shoes and went straight into the kitchen. Shi Mengwan had already cooked a dish. Just as she took it out and placed it on the cooking table, she felt her waist being hugged. She was shocked and the pot in her hand almost fell to the ground. Zhang Haoze reached out to help her hold it steady, then put it back on the stove. She turned around and glared at him. Don't you know how to make a sound when you walk? You scared me to death, don't you know? Sorry. Zhang Haoze pecked her lips. I scared you. Shi Mengwan looked at him and felt that he seemed especially happy today. Are you happy that you scared me? No. Zhang Haoze couldn't help but peck her lips again. Shi Mengwan reached out and pressed against his chest when he wanted to deepen his kiss. That's enough. I still have to cook. Get out of the way. Don't disturb me. Zhang Haoze didn't let go. Instead, he glanced at the cooking table. What else do you want to cook? Stir-fried beef, and this spicy and sour shredded potatoes. Shi Mengwan glanced at him as she spoke. Her voice was very soft. I only know how to cook some home-cooked dishes. If you don't like it, you can eat outside. Zhang Haoze glanced at her. It was rare to see her so cute. He reached out and rubbed the top of her hair. Go and rest. I'll do it. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She watched as Zhang Haoze took off his suit jacket, then unbuttoned the sleeves of his shirt and rolled them up twice. You know how to cook? Shi Mengwan's voice was a little trembling. That wasn't possible, right? She had never seen him cook before, so she thought that he didn't know how to cook. Now that he looked like he was about to make a move, he stood there a little nervously, obviously worried. You don't believe me? Chapter 698. Shi Mengwan looked at the handsome face in front of her and nodded without giving him any face. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes when he heard her words. His gaze was too dangerous. Shi Mengwan wanted to retreat, but it was already too late. Zhang Haoze pulled her back into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her until her hands and feet went soft. He pressed his forehead against hers and his voice was a little hoarse. All right, let's go outside. I'll cook the remaining 2 dishes. Shi Mengwan's legs were a little soft. She leaned against the wall and looked at John Hauser. She felt that he was a little different. He pushed her gently. Go. I'll call you later. Even if Shi Mingwan didn't believe him, she could only go out now. She wiped the dining table and went into the kitchen again. She saw that John Hauser was really cooking. Are you that worried? Shi Mingwan didn't dare to answer John Hauser's question anymore. She took the bowl and chopsticks and quickly left. She had just put it away. Coincidentally, she received a call. A client had some ideas about the design. Shi Mingwan listened patiently and then wrote them down. After she had made an appointment with the client, she was done. When she turned around, John Hauser had already come out of the kitchen. He was holding 2 dishes in his hand. After putting them away, he looked at her. Come, let's eat. Shi Mingwan looked at him suspiciously. She took a few steps forward and looked at the dishes on the table. She bought onions to stir-fry beef today. This dish looked simple, but it wasn't easy to make. Beef was a relatively difficult dish to make. If the heat wasn't right, the beef wouldn't be cooked and the taste wouldn't be good. If the heat was too hot, the beef would be overcooked and it wouldn't taste good. Shi Mingwan looked at the beef on the table. It looked pretty good in terms of appearance. She sat down and tasted it. She looked at John Hauser in surprise. When did you learn to cook? She really couldn't tell at all. John Hauser didn't answer her question. How does it taste? Not bad. It was indeed not bad. Shi Mingwan was more curious about how he learned it. John Hauser didn't say anything. Instead, he scooped a bowl of soup for her and placed it in front of her. Shi Mingwan had done this action many times before. Now that John Hauser was doing the same thing to her, her heart suddenly felt warm. Many thoughts flashed through her mind. Those uncertain thoughts that wanted to resist seemed to have faded again because of the changes caused by John Hauser's return. She couldn't resist him when he was cold and indifferent, and now that he was gentle, she couldn't resist him. What to do? Shi Mingwan. Are you going to sink into oblivion again? The taste of the food was to her liking, but she didn't really like it. She looked up at him and found that he was also looking at her. Her eyes were gentle, and there was a faint smile on her face. Her heart skipped another beat. She rarely saw John Hauser smiling like this. Do you have any plans for tomorrow? John Hauser's voice brought Shi Mingwan back to her senses. She glanced at him. Yes, there's a design that needs to be fixed tomorrow. She had to change the client's request tomorrow. Very urgent? It's all right. They were all regular customers, so there was no rush. Then why don't you free a day and let's go play? Ah. Shi Mingwan was stunned. Go play? Where are we going? You can think about where you want to go. Shi Mingwan lowered her head to eat. Was he asking her out on a date? This time, wasn't he afraid of meeting someone he knew again? It's not the weekend, so there shouldn't be many people. So you can think about it. Shi Mingwan originally wanted to say that they should go to the new amusement park that opened this year, but when she met John Hauser's eyes, she said, let's go to Mount Chin. I haven't climbed a mountain in a long time. John Hauser's expression didn't change. He nodded lightly. Okay. Then let's climb Mount Chin. He looked like he didn't think of anything, but it was also as if Mount Chin was just an ordinary mountain to him. Shi Mingwan's mood was inexplicably conflicted. Did he forget or, at night, Shi Mingwan looked at John Hauser, who was sleeping beside her. She felt that he had changed a lot. Can't sleep? John Hauser didn't do anything to her today. He just hugged her to sleep. No. Shi Mingwan turned over and wanted to sleep with her back to him. John Hauser turned her body around again. His hand was a little unruly on her body. Shi Mingwan instinctively resisted. Stop fooling around. Aren't we going to climb the mountain tomorrow? It's okay. John Hauser kissed her neck. If you can't climb anymore, I'll carry you. You? In the end, Shi Mingwan couldn't win against John Hauser, so she let him have his way once. However, John Hauser knew when to stop. He only came once and let her go. She couldn't sleep at first, but after being tormented by him like this, she fell asleep very peacefully. Shi Mingwan sat in the car. When she arrived at the foot of Mount Chin, she was still a little dazed. Ever since she got separated from her dear brother here when she was 13, she had never come here again. To her, this was a sad place. She had always regretted it and was very upset. If she hadn't suggested coming here, her dear brother wouldn't have met those bad people, and she wouldn't have been separated from him. Shi Mingwan's emotions were complicated at this moment, but she looked at John Hauser as if nothing had happened. Mount Chin had changed a lot compared to more than 10 years ago. A road had been built at the foot of the mountain, leading straight to the mountainside. This was originally a hilly area, so the mountain wouldn't be too high. Shi Mingwan sat in the car and watched the car go up the mountain. Finally, they stopped in the parking lot halfway up the mountain. When she got out of the car, she looked at the car in front of her and behind her. When she turned to face John Hauser, she was a little conflicted. Can you not let them follow us? Okay. It was rare for John Hauser to be so easy to talk to. Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. The scenery at the top of the mountain was quite good. Shi Mingwan didn't have many memories of Mount Qin. All her memories were of her dear brother being beaten, bleeding, and her loss. Now that her mood was different, she walked up and looked at the beautiful scenery on both sides. She was in the mood to appreciate it. She walked too fast and tripped over a small stone by the side of the road. Her body tilted, and John Hauser quickly hugged her waist to stabilize her body. This scene was a little similar. She turned to look at him and her eyes were misty. John Hauser looked at her snuggling in his arms and leaned over to kiss her. Shi Mingwan's face turned red for a moment, but John Hauser let go of her at this moment. Let's go. Shi Mingwan lowered her head. She wanted to walk forward quickly, but John Hauser held her hand. She was stunned again and turned to look at him. However, he held her hand and continued walking forward. It was actually a little cold in Lin City during this season, especially when the mountain wind blew. However, Shi Mingwan's hand was held by John Hauser. His hand was very warm, very hot. That kind of heat made Shi Mingwan ignore the coldness in her hand. Other than the big rock that looked like a zither, there were a few other strange rocks in Mount Qin. Although it couldn't be compared to a famous mountain like Mount Huang, the scenery was quite good. The two of them went up the mountain together. Because it wasn't a weekend, there weren't many people. Shi Mingwan's playfulness finally came to an end after she saw the huge zither stone. She took out her phone to take a picture. The huge stone was like a huge zither because of the changes of time. Shi Mingwan's hand touched it and she turned to look at John Hauser. She almost subconsciously said, "Dear brother, I'll climb up." Shi Mingwan didn't say anything else. More than 10 years ago, Mount Qin hadn't been developed yet. When it wasn't a tourist attraction, no one came here at all. She had once followed her dear brother and climbed up that huge zither. Now that she had grown up and there were tourists passing by the mountain from time to time, she was too embarrassed to climb up. John Hauser held her waist. "Do you want to go up? If you want to go up, I'll carry you up." The stone zither was huge, so it was naturally very tall. Shi Mingwan shook her head. Realizing that she had made a mistake just now, her interest was halved. "No, I'd better be a civilized tourist." Looking at John Hauser, she handed her phone to him. She didn't say anything, but John Hauser understood what she meant. After taking a few photos, Shi Mingwan was about to take her phone back when a couple came up. They were also here to play. When they saw Shi Mingwan and the girl, their eyes lit up. "Beauty, help us take a photo together." Sure. Shi Mingwan didn't refuse. She took the other party's phone and took a photo of them. She took a few photos from all angles. When the girl took the phone, she thanked Shi Mingwan profusely. "Thank you, beauty. Your boyfriend is also very handsome. Why don't I take a photo for you guys too?" Before Shi Mingwan could say anything, John Hauser had already handed the phone to the girl. The girl clicked her tongue. There was a hint of surprise in her eyes. The man was handsome and the woman was beautiful. Such a model was also very pleasing to the eye. Shi Mingwan was still a little uncomfortable when John Hauser stood over. John Hauser put his arm around her shoulder. They looked at the camera together. Shi Mingwan subconsciously curled the corners of her lips. At this moment, the hand on her shoulder suddenly exerted a little force. She looked at John Hauser in confusion. At this moment, he leaned over and kissed her on the lips. Shi Mingwan's eyes widened, but she heard the sound of the camera. The scene froze there. Shi Mingwan was a little embarrassed. After the couple left, she quickly left John Hauser's side. Other than this huge rock that looked like a zither, there were also some other rocks of different shapes on Mount Qin. Shi Mingwan didn't have a deep memory of the time she came here when she was young. Her mood was different when she revisited this old place. She turned to look at John Hauser and he was also looking at her. She wanted to ask him a few times if he was her dear brother, but in the end there was only silence. Forget it, why ask again? Even if she asked, John Hauser wouldn't admit it. Opening her heart, Shi Mingwan let herself play happily. As for the rest of the things for now. It was almost noon when they came down from Mount Qin. The two of them got into the car. Shi Mingwan was tired. She stayed in the office every day and this trip to the mountain was a little tiring. On the other hand, John Hauser. His expression didn't change and he was calm and composed. It didn't affect him at all. Compared to other people, the difference was really big. When the car passed by the foot of the mountain, Shi Mingwan looked outside. That was the place where she had lost contact with her dear brother. She turned to look at John Hauser, but he didn't react at all. Was he really her dear brother? She couldn't forget those memories in time for so many years, but John Hauser seemed to have completely forgotten. Did he have some accident and lose his memory, or was there some inside story that she didn't know? She thought of John Hauser's current status. It was already different from the past. Perhaps that experience of being a hooligan wasn't what he wanted. Was that why he avoided talking about it? Was that so? Are you hungry? What do you want to eat for lunch? Jean Hauser's face enlarged in front of her. Shi Mingwan realized that she was actually staring at Jean Hauser and felt a little embarrassed. Whatever. Jean Hauser glanced at her and wasn't annoyed. The car finally stopped at a very famous Western restaurant in the center of Lin City. Shi Mingwan followed Jean Hauser into the door. Before the two of them could sit down, someone who knew Jean Hauser came over. When the other party saw Jean Hauser, he came over to greet him. When Jean Hauser was exchanging pleasantries with the other party's gaze swept over Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan felt a little uncomfortable and wanted to pull her hand back, but she felt Jean Hauser put his arm around her shoulder and introduced her very calmly, "This is my girlfriend." She was stunned on the spot. Did Jean Hauser know what he was talking about? She didn't even notice that person's ambiguous gaze. After all, at this stage, everyone who knew Jean Hauser knew that he had a fiancée. Now he had another girlfriend. However, looking at Jean Hauser's gaze, that person wouldn't look for trouble. He left after saying hello. After that person left, Shi Mingwan stood there and looked at Jean Hauser. "Do you know what you're talking about? You're my girlfriend to begin with." Jean Hauser looked at her. "I promised you." She wanted a status, so he would give her a status. Shi Mingwan sat there and looked at Jean Hauser, who was completely different from her memories. She couldn't help but feel her heartbeat quicken. Once again she was moved by the heart in front of her. 1-1. Jean Hauser held her hand. With a focused expression he said, "Come back to Qing City with me." At this moment Shi Mingwan couldn't say anything to reject him. She just stared at Jean Hauser in a daze. She actually had an uncontrollable urge in her heart. She really wanted to throw everything aside and go with him. In the next few days, Jean Hauser and Shi Mingwan seemed to have returned to that period of time. He was very busy. After all, he had to deal with a lot of work this time and then prepare to go to Qing City. But every night he would definitely have dinner with her. Shi Mingwan's apartment was very small. Jean Hauser suggested that she change places, but she didn't want to. She wasn't sure how long Jean Hauser could maintain his current appearance. More importantly, if he wanted to leave one day. What was she going to do? A week passed and Jean Hauser seemed to be even busier. Shi Mingwan knew that he was busy, so she didn't plan to disturb him. She also took this opportunity to negotiate with the two OEM factories. Song's Seeking Studio could also be considered to have taken a big step forward. Shi Mingwan was in a good mood. Thinking about how her relationship with Jean Hauser was slowly getting better during this period of time, she suddenly had a sudden impulse and wanted to celebrate with Jean Hauser. Qin Feifei looked at Jean Hauser in front of her. After not seeing him for a week, the person in front of her seemed to have changed again. There was still a cold look in his eyes, but there was a hint of gentleness. Needless to say, this must be the power of love. She was really jealous of the woman who had Jean Hauser's heart. However, she knew better than anyone what the most important thing was right now. "Brother Hao, I'm sorry. It seems that I'll have to trouble you tomorrow." Qin Feifei thought that she was a very filial daughter. Therefore, she spent a lot of effort on Qin Yongchang's retirement home. In the end, she finally chose a small town in Canada. The environment was good and the people were simple. Everything could be said to be perfect. The only imperfection now was that Qin Yongchang didn't want to go. These few days, because of some of her and Jean Hauser's actions, he had been losing his temper at home. "You're welcome. I will naturally do what I promised you." It was very simple to bring Qin Yongchang onto the plane. It wasn't too difficult for Qin Yongchang to stay abroad for the rest of his life. There was a hint of mockery in Qin Feifei's eyes. "Do you know? My dad has been scolding me at home for the past few days." She had been in the company for the past few months, so she had some understanding of the company. It would still take time for her to completely snatch the company back into her hands. Qin Yongchang wanted to resist, but with Jean Hauser around he was greatly suppressed. These few days Qin Yongchang had been scolding people at home. Of course, he wasn't only scolding Qin Feifei, but also Jean Hauser. He said that I have no conscience and that you're an ingrate. I think it's really funny. He was the one who said that everything in the Qin family would be mine in the future. Why is he so angry now that I just got it in advance? Jean Hauser couldn't answer her question. Qin Feifei smiled. Forget it. Let's not talk about him. Brother Hao. Let's have lunch together. Before Zhang Haoze rejected her, Qin Feifei raised her index finger. Don't be in a hurry to reject me. That old fox from Deshang Corporation has arranged to meet at noon today. You know that he has always been lustful. I'm afraid I'll suffer a loss in his hands. Anyway, you've helped me so much. I think you don't mind going to a meal with me, right? She leaned forward a little. If I can settle this deal with Deshang ahead of time, I can also establish my authority in the company ahead of time. Maybe I'll come out earlier to break off the engagement. Zhang Haoze was speechless, but that old fox, Deshang, did not have a good reputation. However, he had some connections behind him. There were benefits to cooperating with him, but this person had a bad reputation. Let's go. Even if Qin Feifei didn't say it, he would still help with these small favors. Thank you, Brother Hao. You're the best. Qin Feifei smiled innocently, looking the same as many years ago. Only they themselves knew that Qin Feifei's smile was completely different. After going downstairs before Qin Feifei got into the car, she hooked her arm around Zhang Haoze's. Brother Hao, I've wronged you. Act as a couple with me. Don't worry. Just this once. I promise I won't trouble you next time. When she gained a foothold in the Qin Corporation, she really didn't need Zhang Haoze to appear. She just needed to put on a show. Zhang Haoze glanced at her. At this point he seemed to be a little helpless. I didn't say I wouldn't help you. Thank you very much. The two of them got into the car together and headed to the place where Qin Feifei had agreed to meet. Zhang Haoze instructed someone to drive. What he didn't expect was that Shi Mingwan, who was across the street and wanted to explain things to Zhang Haoze, happened to see the scene of Zhang Haoze and Qin Feifei leaving arm in arm when she saw him come out. With a cold face, she watched Zhang Haoze bring Qin Feifei into the car with a doting expression. She also saw Qin Feifei's overly bright smile. That scene looked like a loving and affectionate couple. Shi Mingwan suddenly felt that all the words of love she had heard yesterday had turned into a joke. She sat in the car and gripped the steering wheel tightly. There was no trace of emotion in her eyes. Shi Mingwan watched as the shocking motorcade left the building of Zhang Haoze's company. She also got into the car and started the car to leave. However, this time she wasn't going back to the studio. Instead, she was going home. That day, not only did Zhang Haoze accompany Qin Feifei to complete the Deshang project, he also made a trip to the Qin Corporation. Appearing with Qin Feifei could be considered as establishing his prestige. After so many days in the Qin Corporation, his prestige wasn't much inferior to Qin Yongchang's. Many people had always regarded him as the future head of the Qin Corporation. Now that Qin Yongchang said that he was not feeling well and needed to recuperate, the person who took over was Qin Feifei. Everyone was a little worried, but when they saw Zhang Haoze, there was nothing to worry about. After all, with Zhang Haoze around, the Qin Corporation would only get better and better. Qin Feifei looked at the way those people looked at Zhang Haoze and clicked her tongue. Big Brother Hao, your existence is like a great Buddha. With you around, these people won't dare to look down on me. Thank you for supporting me. You're welcome. Zhang Haoze was expressionless. I'm just returning your favor. Tisk, you've returned the favor of saving my life just like that. Why do I feel like I'm at a loss? Qin Feifei couldn't be bothered to hide herself in front of Zhang Haoze now. Zhang Haoze glanced at her. Or would you like uncle to stay? No need. Qin Feifei didn't dare to tease him anymore. All right. I promise you we're even. Zhang Haoze entered her office and looked at some of the recent cases of the Qin Corporation. He then roughly told Qin Feifei some things to pay attention to. After all, Qin Feifei studied business, so she took over these things very quickly. He believed that even if he returned to Qing City in 2 days, it wouldn't affect him much. He spent the entire afternoon at the Qin Corporation. He rejected Qin Feifei's suggestion to have dinner together. He was going to have dinner with Shi Mingwan. You're so anxious to see your sweetheart. I really want to meet her. Zhang Haoze glanced at her and didn't respond. Before everything was completely stable, he didn't want Shi Mingwan to appear in front of Qin Feifei. After leaving the Qin Corporation, he went straight back to Shi Mingwan's apartment, but he found that she wasn't at home. Zhang Haoze was stunned for a moment. At this time, she should have already returned from the studio. Looking at the empty house, he took out his phone and made a call. Shi Mingwan didn't pick up his call. He called again, but no one picked up. Later, Shi Mingwan's phone was turned off. Holding his phone, he looked at the living room in front of him in a daze. What was Shi Mingwan doing? 10 minutes later, Zhang Haoze's men brought news. Shi Mingwan had gone home. Go home? Why was she going home at this time? Chapter 699. When Shi Mingwan arrived home, it was almost evening. Father Shi went to the field to pick vegetables. Mother Shi was cooking in the kitchen. Shi Mingru, who was already in the second year of middle school, was doing her homework in her room when she heard the sound of the car and ran out. Sister? Why are you back? It wasn't the new year, so Shi Mingwan rarely went home. It's nothing. I missed you guys. Shi Mingwan smiled. Although she came back in a hurry, she still had gifts. She took out a big box from the back seat of the car and handed it to Shi Mingru. Didn't you say that the tablet had a black screen last time? I bought you a new one. Wow, sister, you're so nice. Mo. Shi Mingru jumped up on her tiptoes and kissed Shi Mingwan. You just spoil her. Mother Shi heard the sound and came out of the kitchen. A student girl has already used up 2 tablets. No one else uses tablets. Not only does she have a computer, but she also has a tablet and a phone. Don't spoil her. Don't worry. I won't spoil her. Shi Mingwan rubbed her sister's hair. Mom, you're watching over her. Are you spoiling her just because she bought some electronic products? You. Mother Shi wanted to say something else, but Shi Mingwan took out a bigger box from behind. Mom, this is for you. Last time, I heard from Ching saying that this physical therapy device sold very well in their hospital. It's also very useful. Your shoulder always hurts. Try this. Why waste this money? How painful can it be? Just bear with it and it'll pass. Mom, don't worry about money. Shi Mingwan moved the other gifts out of the car. Our studio's business has been very good recently. It's quite busy. Don't worry, your daughter can make money. You're still back if you're busy? Mother Shi took the gifts. Didn't you just come back for the Mid-Autumn Festival? You don't have to come back anymore. You're still running back and forth. Mom, are you chasing me away? Shi Mingwan pretended to get into the car as she spoke. Alright, I finished delivering the things. I'm leaving. You child. Mother Shi patted her on the body. Let's go. I'll ask your dad to buy 2 more vegetables. We'll have more food tonight. Shi Mingwan reached out and hugged Mother Shi. Because she saw Zhang Haoze and Chen Feifei unhappy together, no matter how unhappy they were along the way, she calmed down. She shouldn't be surprised, nor should she be surprised. Zhang Haoze lied to her time and time again, but she was stupid and believed him time and time again. This time there really wouldn't be a second time. She would never trust him again. Looking at the setting sun, Shi Mingwan made up her mind. When Father Shi came back, he was very happy to see Shi Mingwan. The family ate happily. Shi Mingwan sat and chatted with her parents for a while. Then she went to check on Shi Mingru's homework. Actually, there was nothing much to check. Shi Mingru's results were pretty good, and she had always been among the best. She even planned to go to university in Lin City in the future so that she could have a companion. After taking a shower, Shi Mingwan returned to her room, but she couldn't fall asleep. She was in a bad mood. He glanced at his phone. There were a few missed calls. Later she turned off her phone, but Zhang Haoze still called her. She didn't understand why he would call her. He already had Chen Feifei. Why did he have to provoke him? She had made up her mind to give up many times, but every time she would waver under Zhang Haoze's domineering and pestering. Every time she made an oath, it would be broken by Zhang Haoze in the end. It was really enough. This time she really wouldn't believe him again. She wouldn't believe a single word he said anymore. Shi Mingwan thought this in her heart when she blocked Zhang Haoze's number. Shi Mingwan blocked Zhang Haoze's number, but she couldn't let herself fall asleep smoothly. Just as she was about to fall asleep, her phone rang. The ringing sound of the phone that kept disturbing her dreams forced Shi Mingwan to open her eyes. She glanced at the screen. She didn't recognize the number. She pressed it. After a while, her phone rang again. She pressed it again. After a while, it rang again. She pressed it again. After the 5th time, Shi Mingwan finally couldn't help but pick up the phone. Didn't your mother tell you that it's very impolite to call someone in the middle of the night? No. My mother passed away a long time ago. The voice on the other end instantly woke Shi Mingwan up. She looked at the phone in her palm. It was an unfamiliar number, but the voice was indeed Zhang Haoze's. She closed her eyes and was about to hang up. I'm at your door. Zhang Haoze's next sentence made her stop. Right now I'm at your door. It's not the apartment in Lin City, it's your hometown. Jingfeng Town. Shi Mingwan blinked. For a moment she thought she was hallucinating. Zhang Haoze, are you crazy? Come out. I don't want to. Shi Mingwan's voice was full of anger. Zhang Haoze, that's enough. Let me tell you we're done. There's no future and there's no breakup. Anyway, we've never been on good terms. As she spoke, she hung up the phone. Afraid that Jean Hauser would call again, she swiped her hand and prepared to turn off her phone. At this moment a message popped up. Perhaps you want me to visit your parents? Crazy. Shi Mingwan looked at the message and stopped turning off her phone. Was Jean Hauser crazy? He wanted to visit her parents at this time? Did he think the matter wasn't big enough? While she was angry, the phone on the other end rang again. Looking at the flashing number, Shi Mingwan picked it up gloomily. Jean Hauser, that's enough. What do you want? We didn't take any precautions yesterday. You might be pregnant. Do you want me to tell your parents about this? Are you crazy? Shi Mingwan's face was red. Half of it was angry and the other half was shy. Jean Hauser still remembered to take precautions. But the last time yesterday there weren't enough condoms. She wanted to stop it, but it was too late. She could only be glad that it was a safe period. But Shi Mingwan didn't believe in a safe period even once. One had to know that Su Qing-sang was a doctor in the obstetrics and gynecology department. She had told her a lot about all kinds of accidental pregnancies in their hospital. Many of them thought that it was a safe period. But in Su Qing-sang's words, a safe period wasn't safe either. It still depended on the person. Now, Jean Hauser, that bastard, actually used this to threaten her? How could she dare to let him talk nonsense in front of her parents? It wasn't like she didn't want to live anymore. Jean Hauser, don't go too far. 5 minutes. Jean Hauser said these 3 words and hung up the phone. Shi Mingwan was very angry. She only felt that her stomach was hurting now. She looked out of the window. The sky was gloomy, and it seemed like it was going to rain. She gritted her teeth, got up helplessly, put on her coat and went downstairs. It was almost midnight and Father Shi and Mother Shi were both asleep. Shi Mingru's room was at the other end of the corridor, while Mother Shi and the others' rooms were downstairs. This kind of self-built house usually had a large hall outside. Shi Mingwan could only be glad that she didn't have to be afraid of waking her parents up. Before leaving, she didn't know if it was because of some strange coincidence or something else, but she picked up her bag and car keys. When she went outside, the cold wind that hit her face made her stagger. After stabilizing her body, she saw a row of luxury cars lining up on the side of the road diagonally opposite the Shi family's courtyard. If anyone didn't wake up now and saw so many luxury cars in such a small town, they would probably be shocked. Shi Mingwan closed her eyes and had no choice but to get into the car in the middle. It was much warmer inside the car than outside. Shi Mingwan didn't plan to stay for long. It was warm inside the car and the lights above her head made her feel a little warm. But that was all. Jean Hauser, what exactly do you want? She didn't come out because she thought that she was afraid of him or anything. She was just worried about her parents' thoughts and feelings. If Jean Hauser thought that she was afraid of him, then he was really wrong. To her surprise, Jean Hauser didn't seem to be angry. His tone was still gentle. Why didn't you tell me when you went home? I called you and you didn't answer. I was very worried about you. Ignoring the concern in his words, Shi Mingwan glared at the person in front of her. Tell you? Why should I tell you? Who are you to me? Where I go and what I do doesn't seem to have anything to do with you, right? Her words today were very blunt, and her attitude was very wrong. Jean Hauser wasn't sure what happened to Shi Mingwan. They had been getting along well these few days, so he thought that her attitude would soften. If I remember correctly, I seem to be your boyfriend, right? So now she was saying that what she did had nothing to do with him? Could it really have nothing to do with him? Really? Then let's break up now. Anyway, he couldn't be her boyfriend alone, so she didn't want him. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes slightly. He finally realized that something was wrong. What happened? She rushed home. Could it be that her grandmother was forcing her to marry again, or asking her to give in and agree to some conditions? What happened? Shi Mingwan found it funny. This person actually had the nerve to ask her what happened? Shouldn't he be the one who should be telling this sentence the most? She wanted to stab him a few times, but Shi Mingwan held it in. They had talked too much about Chen Feifei. Her questions had never been answered positively. The following answers. No, there were. But behind those answers she would always lose some of herself. She catered to him and accepted everything he gave her. Now she didn't want it anymore. What could happen to me? I'm just tired of it. He wasn't the only one who would play two-timing outside. If she was given a chance, she would prove it to him. Shi Mingwan didn't need to hang herself on him. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes and looked at Shi Mingwan's expression seriously. He was surprised to find that what she said was actually true. Tired of it? He narrowed his eyes and listened to Shi Mingwan's rather heartless words. He tightened his grip on her hand, and his gaze returned to its previous gloominess. Do you know what you're talking about? Of course I know. Shi Mingwan retracted her hand and took a step back. Zhan Haoze, please stay away from me. We're not suitable. She reached out to pull the car door, but found that she couldn't open it at all. At the same time, Zhan Haoze actually asked someone to start the car. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and turned to face Zhan Haoze. Zhan Haoze, that's enough. Stop the car, do you hear me? She was very angry. She reached out to pull the car door, but the car door didn't move at all. Shi Mingwan was furious. She raised her foot and kicked the car door. Unfortunately, she was thin and weak, so she couldn't make the car door move at all. Shi Mingwan's sharp temper rose to her head at this moment. She used both her feet to kick the car door, not caring if she would hurt her feet. Zhan Haoze hugged her waist and gestured for the driver to stop the car. The moment the car stopped, Shi Mingwan bit down on his shoulder. In the late autumn weather, she wore a lot of clothes. To Zhan Haoze, this strength was no different from scratching an itch. He let her bite until she didn't have the strength to bite anymore. He lifted her body and lifted it up. Drive. Zhan Haoze. Shi Mingwan was angry. He didn't listen to her at all, did he? Before the car started, Zhan Haoze looked at her and took away the bag in her hand. He took out the car keys from inside. He gave an order and soon someone came over and took the car keys. Shi Mingwan was angry in her heart. Zhan Haoze, don't be too shameless. If you really talk nonsense in front of my parents, at most we'll just fight to the death. You can try. You came out so late and brought your bag. Didn't you just want to leave? Shi Mingwan was extremely angry. Of course she wanted to leave. She would rather go back to Lin City and quarrel with Zhan Haoze slowly than let Mother Shi see Zhan Haoze appear. It wasn't easy for Mother Shi to calm down during this period of time. She no longer insisted on introducing her to a blind date. If she saw Zhan Haoze appear again, it was hard to say if Mother Shi would find someone to go on a blind date with her again. What are you angry about? Zhan Haoze really didn't understand. They had been fine during this period of time. She had also started to accept him again. What was she doing today? Shi Mingwan didn't want to talk to him. It was already very late at this time. She turned around and leaned against the back of the chair with her back facing Zhan Haoze. She closed her eyes. She used this action to silently resist. She wouldn't answer his question, much less be with him. Zhan Haoze looked at her face. It was rare that he didn't force her to speak like he did in the past. He just stared at Shi Mingwan's face. Shi Mingwan felt Zhan Haoze's gaze and closed her eyes even more tightly. However, at first she pretended to be asleep, but later on she really fell asleep. No matter what, she was someone who had been working all day and driving for half a day. In a daze, she really fell asleep. When Shi Mingwan woke up, she was still woken up by the ringing of her phone. On the other end of the phone, Mother Shi was full of anxiety. Wanwan, where did you go? Why is your car gone? And where are you? Where did you drive to so early in the morning? Where could she drive to so early in the morning? Shi Mingwan originally wanted to deny it, but she suddenly remembered Zhan Haoze's appearance yesterday. She was shocked and quickly woke up. She explained to Mother Shi that something happened at the factory last night, so she returned to Lin City overnight. Although Mother Shi believed this excuse, she scolded her again. She felt that she didn't care about her health and that staying up late to drive was very tiring. But now that she was sure that she was fine, Mother Shi said a few more words to her and hung up. Shi Mingwan hung up the phone and suddenly realized something. The environment in front of her wasn't in her apartment in Lin City. Chapter 700. The unfamiliar environment in front of her wasn't her apartment. Shi Mingwan felt a headache coming on. She sat up and looked at the environment in front of her. This room was very big. It was almost as big as her small apartment. Other than the bed, there was also a sofa and an armchair on the other side. Near the balcony, there were elegant and simple beige curtains. The entire style was European palace style, but it didn't make people feel comfortable. She got out of bed and found that it wasn't her shoes by the bed, but a pair of extremely comfortable indoor slippers. She put on them and walked towards the balcony. When she opened the curtains, she was almost shocked. The huge man-made lake was in front of her. The green in front of her was like a park. But it looked much more elegant than a park. She looked to the side and saw that it was all villa areas. She frowned. She was friends with Su Qing-sang, and she would sometimes attend some clients' dinner parties. She had a certain understanding of some famous villa areas in Lin City. However, the neighborhood in front of her was very unfamiliar to her. She stood for a while and remembered that the last person she saw was Zhan Haoze. She was about to call Zhan Haoze. She didn't know that Zhan Haoze was standing at the door. Where is this? Why am I here? How did he bring her here? No, it should be said, how did she appear here without realizing it? My house. Jean Hauser walked towards her. The morning light shone in from the direction of the balcony. The person in front of her was tall and handsome. The next sentence almost made Shi Mengwan's legs go limp. This is my home in Qing City. Shi Mengwan staggered and almost couldn't stand. Jean Hauser quickly supported her at this moment. For Shi Mengwan, who had just woken up, she didn't have much energy to resist him. Her lips moved and a gloomy look flashed across her eyes. You who agreed to you? Who agreed to you that I was coming to Qing City? Jean Hauser looked at the anger on her face. He didn't seem to understand why she was so angry. I told you that I wanted to bring you to Qing City. Shi Mengwan was so angry that she almost laughed. You said you wanted me to come, so I came? She said this and walked past Jean Hauser to walk out. Jean Hauser grabbed her arm. Are you angry? What? What? Do you think I can't be angry? Do you think I have no reason to be angry at you for taking me to another city or another place without my consent? Jean Hauser was stunned for a moment. Seeing the anger on Shi Mengwan's face, he nodded. I'm sorry. It's my fault I didn't ask for your permission. But I still have things to deal with here and I want to be with you, so I used the wrong method. He lowered his stance a little. Shi Mengwan wasn't used to seeing Jean Hauser like this. In the past she would have wanted to question him, but today she was too lazy to even do so. I accept your apology, so can I leave now? Jean Hauser didn't expect Shi Mengwan to have such a reaction. Shi Mengwan had already walked outside. When she reached the door, he tried to run after her. Shi Mengwan suddenly stopped in her tracks and turned back. Where is my bag? And my car? It's downstairs. I've asked someone to park the car in front of your apartment. After hearing this, Shi Mengwan didn't ask any more questions. She turned around and continued to walk out. Jean Hauser followed behind her. Shi Mengwan took a few steps and realized that there was no way out. She turned around and looked at Jean Hauser, who was following behind her. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but she saw a faint smile in his eyes. The stairs are this way. Jean Hauser explained very kindly. Shi Mengwan snorted and walked past him in the opposite direction. Her angry look made Jean Hauser decide not to tell her that the place where she had walked to the end of the road was actually the elevator. As long as she pressed the button on the side, the elevator would come up. Instead, he chose to follow behind her. Shi Mengwan was wearing cotton slippers, so she naturally couldn't walk fast. She didn't know if the air conditioner was turned on, but the warm wind in this season made her feel a little hot. The stairs were indeed on the other side. After going downstairs, she wasn't in the mood to appreciate the decorations here. She looked around and immediately saw her bag on the sofa. She went forward to pick it up and continued walking outside. After taking 2 steps, she realized that the shoes on her feet were wrong. She had no choice but to turn around and look at Jean Hauser. Where are my shoes? In the shoe cabinet at the entrance, Jean Hauser said. Shi Mengwan nodded and went forward to open the shoe cabinet. Sure enough, she found her shoes and put them on. She reached out and opened the door. The moment the door opened, the cold wind that blew into her face made Shi Mengwan quickly and instinctively close the door. She turned around and looked at Jean Hauser. Qing City is in the north? She always heard him say that he wanted her to accompany him back to Qing City, but she really hadn't paid attention to where Qing City was. She looked at her body. Before she went out yesterday, she had taken a light woolen coat, but now that she had just woken up, she didn't know where the coat was. She was only wearing a thin sweater, so she was really cold now. She glared at Jean Hauser and gritted her teeth for some reason. Mr. Jean, can I ask how I got in yesterday? Jean Hauser looked at the anger on her face and didn't seem to mind. I carried you in. You were sleeping a little soundly. When I got out of the car, I covered you with a blanket. Of course, he wouldn't say that he got into the car directly after getting off the plane. There was a heater in the car and they came directly from the underground garage, so it was normal for her not to feel cold. Shi Mengwan nodded. Her expression was very conflicted and a little angry. Good, very good. Great. In such a situation, if she didn't want to get sick from the cold, she had to ask Jean Hauser. You don't have to leave in a hurry. There are many fun places in Qing City. You can play for 2 days before you leave. Is this considered a forced purchase? Shi Mengwan was angry. Jean Hauser put his arm around her waist. This is a sincere invitation. Shi Mengwan raised her foot and was about to step on the back of his foot. However, she was wearing cotton slippers, so no matter how hard she tried, she didn't cause any harm to Jean Hauser's foot. She was angry and turned around, not wanting to talk to him. However, her stomach made a very uncooperative sound, and Shi Mengwan's face instantly turned red. Let's go. Let's eat. Zhang Haoze brought her in the direction of the dining room. Previously, Shi Mengwan was so focused on leaving that she didn't notice at all. Only now did she realize that there was someone else in the house. After entering the dining room, she realized that not only was the room big, but the dining room was also big. The long white dining table had a lot of exquisite food placed in the middle. It was placed on an exquisite plate. Zhang Haoze held Shi Mengwan's hand and sat down at the other end of the dining table. There are some good places of interest in Qing City. After dinner, we can... Didn't you say that you have a lot of work to deal with? Shi Mengwan's expression was a little cold. Since that's the case, then you should go deal with your work first. Zhang Haoze wasn't angry even though she had brushed him off. He was about to explain that he could spare a day when Tang Hua rushed in from outside. When he saw that Shi Mengwan was also there, he swallowed back the words he was about to say. President Zhang, Monsieur. Shi Mengwan knew Tang Hua. This person had been with Zhang Haoze for an unknown period of time. She nodded as a greeting and watched Zhang Haoze get up. You eat first. I have something to do here. I'll take you out to play in the afternoon. Shi Mengwan didn't mind when she could go out at all. Now she was so happy that she couldn't see Zhang Haoze. Zhang Haoze was busy until it was almost evening before he finished. Shi Mengwan didn't mind. She was thinking about some questions. For example, how could she leave this place and how could she have a showdown with Zhang Haoze? Before she could think clearly, Zhang Haoze had already finished his work. The sky gradually darkened. When Zhang Haoze appeared in front of Shi Mengwan again, Shi Mengwan had just finished scrolling through her WeChat moments. Looking at the pair of long legs in front of her, she raised her head. Zhang Haoze was looking at him. Come on, let's go out to eat. Go out to eat? Shi Mengwan didn't want to move. It's very cold outside. Actually, it wasn't particularly cold. It wasn't the coldest time in Qing City yet. It was just that Shi Mengwan had just flown over from the south, so she felt that it was especially cold here. Zhang Haoze held her hand, and only then did she realize that there was a fitting room on the other side of the room. Pulling open the door of one of the cabinets, he saw that it was filled with women's clothing. Everything was new and the tags were still there. There were clothes for all seasons of the year. At the bottom there were different kinds of shoes. Seeing so many women's clothes, Shi Mengwan turned her head to look at him. Her slightly furrowed brows carried some complicated emotions. Although these clothes were all her measurements, they were all standard sizes. So, aren't we going out to eat? Take a coat and let's go. Shi Mengwan couldn't muster up much interest, but Zhang Haoze seemed to be in a good mood. Seeing that she didn't make a move, he took the initiative to pick out a khaki-colored woolen coat and handed it to her. This one's not bad. Although Shi Mengwan wasn't very satisfied, she still put on the clothes. She found a pair of boots and put them on. Shi Mengwan followed Zhang Haoze out of the door. After getting into the car, Shi Mengwan wasn't in a good mood. Zhang Haoze, on the other hand, looked very relaxed. He reached out to hold her hand. Sorry, Tang Hua had something to talk to me about. I forgot the time and didn't accompany you. Are you angry? Shi Mengwan wasn't angry. She pulled back her hand and Zhang Haoze went to hold her hand again. She avoided him again. This time she accidentally touched a button and the car window rolled down. The cold wind blew, and Shi Mengwan closed the car window again. The car happened to make a turn at this time, so she didn't notice that in a villa next to her, Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao had just gotten out of the car. Su Qingsang happened to see her sitting in the car window and thought that her eyes were playing tricks on her. Zhang Haoze's car circled around the city of Qing City. He seemed to be in a good mood today. He sat in the car and briefly introduced some of the scenic spots in Qing City to Shi Mengwan, as well as places to go. Unfortunately, Shi Mengwan wanted to tell him the truth and break up, so she was in low spirits and couldn't muster up any energy. In the end, Zhang Haoze thought that she was hungry, so he brought her to a place that was said to be very delicious roasted mutton. It was a typical northern courtyard house, but it was cleverly divided into private rooms. Zhang Haoze and Shi Mengwan were brought into the private room and sat down. Not long after they ordered, Zhang Haoze's phone rang. He glanced at Shi Mengwan and went out to answer the call. He didn't expect that as soon as he walked out, he would meet Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao, who had also come because of the fame. President Zhang? President Hua. The two men stood at the door of the private room and greeted each other. Shi Mengwan saw Su Qingsang at first glance just now. She was quite frightened and instinctively hid in the bathroom in the private room. Zhang Haoze was still chatting with Hua Jinyao outside. Shi Mengwan didn't care about the things that the men talked about at all. She only cared if Jean Hausa would suddenly go crazy and ask them to come in for dinner. If Su Qingsang saw her, it would really be embarrassing. Fortunately, Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao didn't meet any acquaintances here. They were just here to play. After greeting each other, Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao went to the backyard to watch them roast the whole lamb. Shi Mingwan only felt that her back was covered in sweat. When Jean Hausa entered the door, her face inevitably became a little gloomy. "I want to leave." Her voice was a little anxious. Looking at Jean Hausa, she didn't have any intention of staying at all. "The lamb is already being roasted. It'll be ready soon." Jean Hausa sat down beside her and looked at her pale face. Ever since he came to look for her again this time, it was rare for him to have the intention to tease her. "Are you going out now because you want to meet that good friend of yours, Jean Hausa?" Su Qingsang hadn't returned to the private room yet? "Your good friend is visiting right now. If you go out now, I won't object, but I can't guarantee that you'll coincidentally meet her." Shi Mingwan's expression was very ugly. She glared at Jean Hausa in front of her, wishing that she could stare a hole in his body. Jean Hausa squeezed her hand again. "If you want to see her, it's easy. I can ask President Hua to bring her along. It'll be more lively with more people, don't you think?" It was his head. Shi Mingwan turned her face away. She didn't want to see this bastard at all. Naturally, the meal was a little tasteless. Shi Mingwan saw the picture of the roasted lamb posted by Su Qingsang on her WeChat moments. She had even circled her name on it, saying that the next time she came, she could treat her to a good taste. Shi Mingwan finally liked it and threw her phone to the side. That night, Jean Hausa said that he wanted to take her to the hot spring. Shi Mingwan wasn't in the mood at all. "Jean Hausa, when do you plan to let me go? Why are you in such a hurry? I said that there are many places worth visiting in Qing City. There's even a hot spring here. It's very comfortable to soak in a hot spring in this kind of weather. I'll get someone to arrange it tomorrow." How could Shi Mingwan still be in the mood to soak in a hot spring? She was in a hurry to return to Lin City now. At this moment, Jean Hausa hugged her waist. "Pregnant women can't soak in a hot spring, so don't worry. It's unlikely that your good friend Mrs. Hua will meet you. If I return to Lin City, it's even more unlikely that she'll meet me." Shi Mingwan's words were a little mocking. Jean Hausa acted as if he didn't hear her. He didn't think that something was wrong with Shi Mingwan because he saw her with Chen Feifei. He only thought that the reason why she was unhappy was because he brought her to Qing City without her consent, so she was throwing a tantrum. Seeing that she couldn't get through to him, Shi Mingwan decided not to say anything. She opened the door like a thief and called the waiter to confirm that Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao were in their own private room. Then she left in a hurry. Shi Mingwan didn't expect that what she was afraid of would come true. The more she didn't want to meet Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao, the more she would meet them. When she was pulled out of the door by Jean Hausa and brought to the famous ancient city of Qing City, she actually met Su Qingsang again. She was a fashion designer, so she didn't have a fanatic interest in clothing stores. However, when it came to ethnic clothing stores with unique styles, they had no resistance. Therefore, along the way, even though she didn't want to be with Jean Hausa at all, when she saw the ethnic clothing store in front of her, she still couldn't help but lift her foot and walk in. Her teacher had once told them that a good fashion design not only needed to be innovative, but also needed to be passed down. What was national was the world, and the characteristics of a nation also needed to be passed down. Shi Mingwan looked at the exquisite handmade clothes and liked them very much. Jean Hausa said at the right time, "If you like them, you can try them on." "Yes, miss, you have such a good figure. You will definitely look good in our clothes." The shop assistant said flattering words at the right time. Seeing that Shi Mingwan stood still, she added, "The clothes in our store usually only have one pair of each color and size. Although it's pretty much the same ethnic style, we've done our own processing and processing. Miss, please try them on." It wasn't the peak season for tourism, so there weren't many people. Shi Mingwan looked at the obvious Uyghur costume and finally nodded. She didn't expect that when she went in to try on the clothes, it would be such a coincidence. Su Qingsang and Hua Jinyao just happened to enter the store. Speaking of which, Su Qingsang entered this store because of her. Although her belly was big and she couldn't wear it, Shi Mingwan could. Su Qingsang just wanted to buy a gift for Shi Mingwan. But she didn't expect to meet Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa also didn't expect that they and Hua Jinyao would meet in such a big city with a population of tens of millions. They were really fated. Hua Jinyao looked at him with a probing gaze. Jean Hausa was quite calm and even started to chat with Hua Jinyao again. "President Jean, are you alone?" "No, I'm with my girlfriend." Jean Hausa openly admitted Shi Mingwan's identity. Of course, he didn't miss the flash of dissatisfaction in Su Qingsang's eyes. Su Qingsang naturally didn't like Zhang Hao's behavior. One had to know that Zhang Hao already had Chen Feifei as his fiancée, but now he had another girlfriend. She was willing to bet that his girlfriend was definitely not Chen Feifei. Su Qingsang wasn't interested in meddling in other people's business. She turned around, took a dress that she thought was suitable for Shi Mengwan, and went to the fitting room. On the other end, the shop assistant took the initiative to ask because Shi Mengwan hadn't come out. Zhang Hao looked at Hu Jinyao, who had been staring at him curiously, and walked into the fitting room under the shop assistant's gaze. Chapter 701. Hearing Su Qingsang's voice outside, Shi Mengwan, who had already changed into a set of ethnic clothes, didn't have the courage to walk out at all. She never expected that she would meet Su Qingsang when Zhang Hao dragged her out to the night market in the ancient city because she was in a bad mood. She didn't go out, and the shop assistant even started to ask her if she was feeling unwell. Could she be comfortable? Just yesterday she heard Zhang Hao call Chen Feifei. Chen Yongchang had already been sent on the plane by Zhang Hao. Chen Yongchang's illegitimate son was also sent away. If it weren't for Zhang Hao, it wouldn't have been so easy to achieve such a feat. However, that illegitimate son ran away after getting off the plane. Chen Yongchang was a key target of surveillance. But that illegitimate son wasn't. Chen Feifei was a little nervous when he ran away. She was more or less afraid that he would return to Lin City to take revenge on her. Right now, her foundation wasn't stable. If that person wanted to do something, although she wouldn't be powerless to resist, she would still be an obstacle. However, to Zhang Hao, everything was under his control. Therefore he told Chen Feifei not to think too much. That illegitimate son wouldn't be able to run far. He would catch him and lock him up with Chen Yongchang according to the original plan. In Zhang Hao's heart, this was just a call under a transaction. It couldn't be any more normal. But with Shi Mengwan it was completely different. It was just that her previous seeing is believing had turned into hearing is believing. Because of this reason, whether it was eating the roasted whole lamb or returning to the Cherry Blossom Manor at night, she didn't have a good expression towards Zhang Hao. At night she didn't even allow Zhang Hao to touch her. Now that he touched her again she had a huge reaction. The sense of shame that she was a mistress, and the resentment that Zhang Hao had caused her to become like this was very obvious. Therefore she didn't want to bother with Zhang Hao at all. Including today, she was also forcefully dragged out by Zhang Hao to go shopping. If possible, she just wanted to return to Lin City as soon as possible. But in this situation, it was unknown if she could walk out of this small fitting room, let alone return to Lin City. Yet, Zhang Hao entered the door at this moment. She saw a very light smile on his face as he stared at the embarrassment on her face. "Are you okay?" "Okay." Yes, in his heart, what did other people's feelings count for? She was angry in her heart, but Zhang Hao still had the ability to take advantage of her at this time. She was angry and reached out to push him without thinking. He advanced, she retreated, until there was nowhere to retreat. Afraid of being heard? What do you think would happen if I took you right here? You look very beautiful in this outfit. Scared. If you don't want me to take you here, then beg me. The things he did to her, the words that came out of his mouth sounded like a bastard to her. Zhang Hao, don't go too far. She hadn't forgotten about the apparel incident last year. She absolutely did not want to become the heroine of such an event. You don't have the slightest sincerity in your pleading. If you listen to me tonight, I'll let you go. How about it? Shi Mengwan had no choice but to lower her head. Please. In the end, Shi Mengwan was carried out of the fitting room by Zhang Hao, and he even kindly covered her face so that she wouldn't be seen by Hu Jinyao or Su Qingsang. However, Shi Mengwan heard the words, "Remember, you owe me again." The shameless bastard. If it weren't for him, how could she have fallen into such a situation? She still owed him again? How thick-skinned was this person? After leaving the ancient city, Shi Mengwan wasn't in the mood to shop anymore. She said that she wanted to go back. Zhang Hao didn't argue with her and brought her into the car. The majestic motorcade once again drove from the parking lot of the ancient city to Cherry Blossom Manor. It was night. Shi Mengwan, who had taken a shower, went to bed early. She wanted to avoid Zhang Hao, so she closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep before he finished his work. She thought that Zhang Hao would let her go if she fell asleep. But it turned out that she was too naive. In a daze she felt someone pressing on her. That feeling reminded her of a big wolf dog she had raised when she was young. It always liked to pounce on her like this. "Big Yellow, get down," she said in a daze. She didn't forget to reach out and push Big Yellow away. This time, Big Yellow was very persistent. She pushed it a few times but couldn't push it down. Shi Mingwan called out again. "Big Yellow, stop fooling around." Zhang Haoze propped himself up with one hand and looked at Shi Mingwan. She was really sleeping soundly. There was also Big Yellow? Zhang Haoze's face darkened slightly when he heard the name of some kind of animal. He no longer hesitated and began to take off Shi Mingwan's clothes. There were naturally all kinds of pajamas in the cloakroom. Shi Mingwan chose the most conservative kind. The round-necked cotton pajamas wrapped tightly around her body. But even so, Zhang Haoze still saw some of her sexuality. Shi Mingwan had an extremely charming face, but it didn't make her look so beautiful. Instead, the more he looked at her, the more beautiful she became. It was naturally troublesome to take off this set of pajamas. Zhang Haoze tried it, but Shi Mingwan was sleeping soundly. His hands didn't stop moving. Just as he was about to lift the clothes up and help her take them off completely, she once again treated him as Big Yellow and pushed him down. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes. He propped up his arm and stared at Shi Mingwan's hand for a long time. Finally he got up and left. However, he didn't leave. Instead, he went to get a pair of scissors. The heater was turned on in the room, so he wasn't worried that Shi Mingwan would catch a cold. Zhang Haoze used a pair of scissors to fry the comfortable but expensive pajamas just like that. The clothes were cut inch by inch, and the scenery that was previously tightly wrapped was naturally revealed. He cut very carefully and almost didn't touch Shi Mingwan's skin. Putting down the scissors, he continued to take off her pants. This was much easier. However, when he completely took it off, Shi Mingwan also woke up. She dreamed that Big Yellow refused to get off her body no matter what, but it even pulled up her blanket. At first, she tried to reach out to pull it, but later she realized that she couldn't stop it. When she realized that it wasn't Big Yellow who was pulling her pants and woke up, she realized that other than a pair of underwear, she was almost completely naked. Her face turned red and she instantly woke up. She glared at the culprit. "Zhang Haoze, what are you doing?" Zhang Haoze was about to continue tearing off the last small piece of cloth, but he didn't expect Shi Mingwan to wake up. When he met her angry eyes, he propped up his body again and moved closer to her. His lips pointed at her cheek. He kissed her lips, then moved his lips over and landed on her earlobe. He gently bit the small jade bead. "What do you think I'm doing? You go down for me." "Go down?" Zhang Haoze chuckled. His big hand picked up Shi Mingwan's black hair that was scattered on the pillow and sniffed. "Your memory isn't very good. Do you want me to remind you what you promised me?" "What?" Shi Mingwan woke up, but she was still in a daze. She didn't understand what he meant at all. "Previously in the ancient city, you promised me that you would listen to me when you came back." Shi Mingwan's expression froze. She suddenly reacted. In front of her, Zhang Haoze was half lying there with one hand supporting his body. His burning gaze was like that of a wolf as he stared at her. How could such a Zhang Haoze not make her afraid? Without thinking, she wanted to get off the bed. Zhang Haoze easily wrapped his arms around her waist. "What? Do you want to go back on your word?" Shi Mingwan swallowed her saliva. She really didn't know how to respond to this. "You're a scoundrel." At that time, she had no other choice. "Scoundrel? Who's a scoundrel?" Zhang Haoze retracted his arm and she pressed close to his body. He had just taken a shower and only had a bath towel on his body. Touching his slightly warm chest, Shi Mingwan felt a little thirsty. "Of course it's you. If it weren't for you, how could I?" He didn't finish his sentence, but Zhang Haoze understood what he meant. He chuckled and raised her chin with his other hand. "So, you don't want to admit it now, do you?" "Who wanted to admit it?" Shi Mingwan pushed him and Zhang Haoze bit her lips. "It's fine if you don't want to admit it." He took a few steps back and his gaze fell on Shi Mingwan's face as if he was thinking. "Speaking of which, I've worked with President Hua 2 or 3 times. The manor we're living in now was given by the Hua family's Tianyu group. We've worked together so many times and we're living in a house developed by others, but I've never invited him here as a guest. It's really a little rude." Seeing that Shi Mingwan's little face was gradually turning pale, he slowly said, "Why don't I be the host tomorrow and invite President Hua and Mrs. Hua to my humble house? I can also be considered to be a host? What do you think?" "Not much." This blatant threat made Shi Mingwan's expression very ugly. She glared at Zhang Haoze in front of her, wishing that she could glare at his face. However, at this moment she was lying down and wasn't wearing any clothes. No matter how she glared at him, she didn't have any imposing manner. Instead, to Jean Hausa, it was like seduction. You don't object? Then it's settled. Jean Hausa got up and was about to get off the bed. I'll get someone to arrange it now. Enough. Shi Mingwan quickly sat up and reached out to grab his hand. Her face was very red. What exactly do you want? I told you you'll listen to me today. Shi Mingwan was extremely annoyed. Did she have any other choice now? She closed her eyes and nodded. She lay back on the bed. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes at her expression, as if she was about to die. He stared at Shi Mingwan's face for a while, then suddenly got up and left. The sudden sound of footsteps leaving surprised Shi Mingwan. She really didn't understand why he would be so kind as to let her go. She lowered her head and looked at herself. She seemed to have just realized her current state, so she quickly pulled up the blanket to cover her body. She curled up and wanted to find her clothes, but she suspected that Jean Hausa wouldn't let her go so easily. Sure enough, it didn't take long for Jean Hausa to return. This time he had something in his hand. Shi Mingwan, who heard the voice, turned around and saw the thing in his hand. Her little face was slightly stunned, and she just stared at him blankly. Today is a good day to remember. Jean Hausa took a few steps forward and walked to the bedside. He looked at Shi Mingwan, and his eyes carried a depth that she could see at a glance. So let's drink to celebrate. As he spoke, he had already placed the 2 open bottles of wine in his hands on the bedside table. There were also 2 wine glasses placed there. Shi Mingwan swallowed her saliva. What was this guy trying to do? Realizing the danger, Shi Mingwan's first reaction was to escape. Jean Hausa didn't give her a chance. The moment she got up, he held her in his arms. He imprisoned her body in his arms and sat on the bed, hugging Shi Mingwan, who was almost naked. Didn't you say that you'll listen to me today? Why are you running? How could Shi Mingwan not want to run? She was almost sure that what Jean Hausa wanted her to do later would definitely make her feel very ashamed and unwilling. She didn't answer, and Jean Hausa didn't force her. He was in a good mood today. He picked up the bottle of wine and poured the 2 glasses. He picked up one of the glasses and handed it to Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan looked at the wine glass and shook her head. I don't know how to drink. Even if she did, she didn't want to drink it now. The situation in front of her was too dangerous. Although she agreed to listen to Jean Hausa, she still wanted to have a chance to breathe. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes and didn't force her. He directly drank the wine in the glass in one gulp. Just as Shi Mingwan thought that he was going to let her go, he pressed the back of her head and aimed at her lips. When Shi Mingwan got up from the bed in the morning, she hadn't recovered from that shameful and secret lust. Her limbs were weak and her body was weak. The bedding on the bed had been changed long ago. Not only the bedsheets and quilt covers, but even the mattress underneath had been changed. When she thought about how Jean Hausa had shamelessly asked someone to come up and change the bedding after carrying her into the bathroom last night, Shi Mingwan wished she could find a hole to hide in. She didn't want to go downstairs at all, nor did she want to go out. Feeling someone come in, she buried her face in the quilt. But very quickly the quilt was lifted. Get up and eat. Jean Hausa sat by the bed and looked at her. The last thing she wanted to see was Jean Hausa. She turned around and didn't look at him at all. I can't eat. One. Before his hand could touch her shoulder, she had already waved it away. Such a simple action made her body ache. It could be seen how much someone had gone overboard yesterday. Jean Hausa, I want to go back to Lin City. She had had enough. She had been here for 3 days. On the first day, she had taken a quick stroll around the streets and glanced around. On the second day, she hadn't even walked 1/3 of the ancient city trip when she gave up because she met Su Qingsang. There was no need to mention today. Because of Jean Hausa's craziness yesterday, her waist was now soft. Not to mention going out to play, she found it difficult to go downstairs. You haven't played yet. Why are you going back? Jean Hausa didn't understand why she was throwing a tantrum again. She had clearly agreed to stay for a few days. When he met Shi Mingwan's mocking gaze, Jean Hausa's face heated up and he suddenly reacted. Sorry. He reached out to touch her cheek. His strength was gentle and gentle. I lost control yesterday. It wasn't just yesterday that he lost control. Shi Mingwan glared at him and wanted to bite him in her heart. Jean Hausa, no matter what you say, I have to go back to Lin City. You arrange it. It wasn't that she didn't want to book her own plane ticket home, but Jean Hausa, this extremely shameless person, had taken away her ID. She only found out later that she could use her bag as she pleased, but the ID inside had long been taken away by Jean Hausa. How could she return to Lin City in such a situation? Can't you play here for 2 more days? When Jean Hauser spoke, he happened to meet her angry eyes. He held her hand. "You're not feeling well today. Rest for a day. We'll go out tomorrow." "No need." She wasn't in the mood to play with Jean Hauser. "If I stay here any longer, I'll lose my life." Not only was she angry, but she was also embarrassed. Last night, she almost died in his hands a few times. How could she dare to stay? Moreover, Su Qingsang and Hua Jingyao were still in Qing City. Qing City wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. There were only so many places she could play. If she met them again, she really wouldn't want to live anymore. Jean Hauser frowned and looked at the resistance on her face. He knew that he had indeed gone overboard last night. It was just that the feeling was too beautiful. He really couldn't control himself. The atmosphere was silent for a moment. Shi Mingwan said again, "I want to go back to Lin City." Jean Hauser looked at her as if he was looking at a willful child. When Shi Mingwan said that she wanted to go back for the third time, he finally reacted. "I'll get someone to send you back tomorrow." Shi Mingwan didn't believe that he would be so easy to talk to. As she wished, Jean Hauser added, "But you have to accompany me on another trip tonight." "I'm not going." "You'll like it," Jean Hauser said very gently. "You were too tired yesterday. I'll take you to the hot spring tonight." Shi Mingwan looked at Jean Hauser. The person in front of her wasn't as evil and perverted as he was last night. He looked at her with a very focused gaze. Not only was he focused, but she also found her own shadow in it. Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She turned her face away to avoid Jean Hauser's gaze and told herself, these were all false appearances. He was a bastard who had a foot in both camps, a scumbag. Jean Hauser had no way of knowing what Shi Mingwan was thinking. He was also very free today. To him, his rare patience and good temper were all used on Shi Mingwan. At night he really brought Shi Mingwan to the hot spring. As if he knew the trauma he had caused to her yesterday, Jean Hauser didn't do anything this time. The hot spring water made Shi Mingwan feel much more comfortable. After returning to Cherry Blossom Villa to rest, she slept until midnight. She was once again woken up by Jean Hauser's blood on the day of the accident. The nightmare came again, and this time she woke up directly. "Wanwan, are you okay?" Jean Hauser slept with her. Shi Mingwan shook her head. She hadn't had this dream for some time. She had no time to care about Jean Hauser's concern. Shi Mingwan hurriedly went into the bathroom to wash her face and calm down. Her good friend, who she met once a month, came as scheduled. Shi Mingwan looked at herself in the mirror and suddenly heaved a sigh of relief. She wasn't pregnant. Jean Hauser's misdeeds these few times had made her confused. There were even a few times when he didn't take any precautions, and she didn't have the rationality to remind him. Now that her period had finally come, she wasn't pregnant. That was good enough. She came out of the bathroom and had just laid down when Jean Hauser's hand came over. He saw that her mood wasn't right just now, so he knew that she had a nightmare. He wanted to ask her how she was. "My period is here." Shi Mingwan closed her eyes and didn't look at him at all. "Don't touch me." Jean Hauser's hand stopped for a moment. He looked at the resistance on Shi Mingwan's face and didn't understand why she would lose her temper again. "I just wanted to ask if you had a nightmare." She didn't have to treat him like a beast. Every time he touched her, he wanted to have sex with her, right? "Thank you for your concern." Shi Mingwan still didn't open her eyes, and her voice was even colder than before. "I didn't have a nightmare. I'm fine." Save your concern for someone you should care about more. Don't think that she didn't know that he had contacted Qin Feifei when he was soaking in the hot spring tonight. Since he couldn't bear to part with her, why was he putting on an act in front of her now? He didn't think he was hypocritical, but she found it disgusting. Jean Hauser contacted Qin Feifei today because his people had found the illegitimate son who had run away. He had also sent him to Qin Yongchang. He had arranged the rest of the matters. For the time being, other than the matter of the Qin family's company in Lin City, he had nothing to do with Qin Feifei. He didn't know that Shi Mingwan had heard his call. That was why she didn't like him so much now. He suddenly heard her say something about someone he should care about more. He didn't react at all to who she was talking about. "The person I care about the most is you." His words could be considered as a confession. Shi Mingwan didn't believe a single word. Just now, he had been persuading Miss Chen on the phone not to worry, but now he turned around and told her that the person he cared about the most was her? Who would believe him? She didn't believe him anyway. Shi Mingwan rested for a night and didn't stay for another day. The next day, as soon as Jean Hauser arranged the plane, she immediately flew back to Lin City. Sitting on the plane, she looked at the empty seat next to her. This time, Jean Hauser didn't return to Lin City with her, which made her feel very unreal. John Hauser really let her go home just like that? He didn't follow her, and he didn't send anyone to keep an eye on her? This really didn't make sense. But sure, Mingwan didn't care about him. Maybe John Hauser was satisfied after that night and was tired of it. Maybe he finally decided to be kind and let her go? Thinking of this, sure, Mingwan relaxed. Thinking of what John Hauser did that night, she still felt a little uncomfortable. But this kind of uneasiness was insignificant compared to the freedom and equal relationship she needed to enjoy. No matter how overbearing John Hauser was or how much he pestered her, it was over for them now, right? For the next month, John Hauser didn't come to look for her, which confirmed her guess. Good, very good. John Hauser finally let her go. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.